Welcome to This Explainer. I'm your enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics, and I am thrilled to kick off our foundational lesson on why enterprise data governance actually matters. I've spent decades designing, fixing, and running data governance programs across heavily regulated spaces. Think banking, energy trading, asset management, and my absolute goal is to teach you how to do exactly the same. Whether you're an aspiring data governance lead, a data steward, an architect, a platform engineer, or maybe a privacy and compliance officer, this practical hands-on session is built for you. So let's jump right in and look at why a business should actually spend real money and effort governing its data in the first place. Now, before we get completely into the weeds, just a quick reminder of where we are. We're embarking on a massive sequenced journey together across 21 modules and 529 chapters. We are going to cover the whole shebang, from building an operating model and writing policies, through metadata catalogs, master data, and architecture. We'll explore privacy regulations, data lineage, cloud, data mesh, and even tackle responsible AI before wrapping up with a huge data quality masterclass. It's all grounded in vendor-neutral, regulated finance best practices with job-ready artifacts. But today, we are starting right at the absolute foundation, Module 01, Chapter 1. Here is our executive briefing for today. We'll define enterprise data governance, break down the two-sided business case, quantify the true cost of data, look at the 4 forces accelerating governance right now, and wrap up with global rules and organizational maturity. Okay, Section 1, defining governance, authority, and control. Let's start with a definition you can actually use, something you can comfortably say to a chief executive without their eyes glazing over. Data governance is the exercise of authority and control over an organization's data through people, policy, and process, making it trustworthy, protected, and fit to use. Notice what's missing there. It is absolutely not a shiny software tool you buy. It's not just a database you build. It's the literal set of agreed-upon rules determining who owns the data, what shape it has to be in, who gets to use it, and crucially, how you can prove all of that to an auditor. I really love this traffic system analogy because it makes it so concrete. A city packed with cars is like your firm packed with data, right? Those cars create enormous value. But without traffic rules, lanes, and stoplights, that value just turns into gridlock and crashes. Governance isn't the cars and it isn't the roads, it's the traffic system. Honestly, nobody complains that a green light slows them down. In a massively complex environment, those rules are the exact things that make speed safely possible at all. Moving on to Section 2, the two-sided case, value versus risk. So every executive is going to lean forward and ask, why should I fund this? A seasoned practitioner will always argue a two-sided business case. On one side, you have offensive value. This is what makes your data actually pay the bills. It's faster reporting, where finance and risk teams finally stop arguing over whose numbers are right, and it ensures your data is actually ready for AI. But on the flip side, you have defensive risk. This is what stops data from bleeding money. Defensive governance is how you reduce regulatory failures, prevent massive privacy breaches, and basically avoid those reputation-destroying fines. To get real funding, you almost always need to pitch both sides of this coin. All right, Section 3, the cost of data, specifically ungoverned data. To truly understand that defensive risk, we have to talk about what ungoverned data silently costs your firm every single day. Now, to a rookie, poor data just sounds like a minor headache, but in a large firm, it is a massive recurring financial loss. Look at this. A staggering 35% of the cost of poor data is purely manual rework and reconciliation. 35%. That is an invisible bleed hiding quietly inside the salaries of expensive staff who are stuck fixing things by hand that just should have been right the first time. It rarely shows up as a line item in a budget, which is exactly why it's so incredibly dangerous. Let's make this totally concrete with a real-world scenario. Imagine a bank reporting its month-end risk position.
In this scenario, just one single shared currency conversion rate is accidentally left stale on a volatile day. The result? The reported exposure is suddenly overstated by a couple million euros. Because of that tiny error, over €500,000 in capital is needlessly locked up in a regulatory buffer. $500,000! And the final outcome? The report gets flagged, you have to do a restatement, the regulator starts asking questions, and you get an audit finding. All over one stale rate.
Now, here is the absolute kicker. No person made a malicious decision here. The technology didn't just randomly break. This is a governance gap, plain and simple. It happened because literally nobody was accountable for that reference data, and there wasn't a single rule requiring it to be fresh before the report ran. Closing these exact gaps on purpose, that is the entire point of governance.
Okay, Section 4, Four Forces, Urgent Priorities.
Look, governance hasn't been a nice-to-have for a long time. There are 4 macro-structural forces turning this into a literal board-level emergency right now. First, regulation. Regulators are demanding explicit proof that your data is accurate and protected, backed by real financial penalties. Second, analytics. Firms are fiercely competing on reliable insights. Third, artificial intelligence. AI amplifies whatever you feed it. Feed it ungoverned data, and you're just scaling bad outcomes and bias at machine speed. And fourth, cloud migration. Moving to the cloud multiplies everywhere your data can live, leak, or drift. You have to design control from the start. I like to think of these 4 forces like a rising tide. Back in the day, a firm could leave its data kind of scattered on the beach. Untidy, sure, but mostly harmless. But as AI, cloud, and heavy regulations raise the water level, that exact same messy data becomes a lethal hazard. It floats away, gets into the wrong hands, or totally sinks a critical business decision. Doing data governance is like building the harbor wall before the tide comes in. You definitely don't want to be building it after the flood has already ruined the town. Bringing us to Section 5, Global Rules and Maturity Adapting the Framework. So where do you even start? Let me assure you, no company needs world-class governance overnight. It is a journey. This maturity curve is fantastic because it lets you honestly assess where your organization is right now without trying to boil the ocean. Most firms start entirely on the left side, at the reactive stage. They only fix problems when something breaks and causes real pain. Zero prevention. The whole point of a governance program is to take very deliberate, measurable steps to the right, moving through defined and managed until you finally hit optimized. That's where governance becomes automated and actually gives you a massive competitive edge. And if you're building a global program, you absolutely have to adapt your pitch based on where you're operating. The core concepts of value and risk, those are universal, but the driving forces are totally different. Over in the EU, you're leading with compliance and privacy rights. Think GDPR for privacy and DORA for operational resilience. But in the US, the conversation shifts heavily to sectoral rules, litigation risk, and shareholder value, dealing with things like Dodd-Frank. And if you're operating in India, you pivot again to rapid market growth, the new DPDP Act for personal data, and very specific localized RBI rules. It's the exact same data, but you're playing by 3 entirely different rulebooks. So, we've built a bulletproof case for why enterprise data governance matters. We know the value it creates, the massive risks it mitigates, and the structural forces making it an absolute necessity today. But here's the million-dollar question. How do you actually turn all these abstract ideas into a hard, precise project charter? How do you define the exact scope to get this off the ground? Well, that's exactly what we're going to tackle next in Chapter 2, where we'll set the scope and success criteria for your governance program. Until then, keep your data governed and your insights sharp. See you in the next chapter.
Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. I am your host, bringing decades of hands-on experience from Durga Analytics, where we literally design and run these exact data governance programs across heavily regulated environments, global investment banks, integrated energy trading majors, and large asset managers. If you're an aspiring data governance lead, a data architect, or maybe a compliance officer, you already know that great ideas don't secure budgets. Precise, defensible language does. So today, we're going to learn exactly how to translate your business case into a rock-solid program charter. Real quick, before we get into the weeds, I want to just ground us in the sheer scale of the journey we're on. This Enterprise Data Governance course is a 21-module sequenced roadmap to success. We're covering the whole shebang, everything from foundations and operating models early on, through data quality, architecture, and cloud, all the way to a functional data quality masterclass in Module 21. It is a completely vendor-neutral journey, grounded in regulated finance overlays and packed with job-ready artifacts. Right now, we're stationed right at the beginning in Module 1, Chapter 2. This is where we take a broad business case and sharpen it into the exact framing you'll need to survive a brutal budget review. In the previous chapter, we looked at the theoretical business case for governance, but theory doesn't get signed off by a steering committee, right? In this explainer, we are going to define exactly what a governance program is, draw its absolute boundaries, and establish the specific criteria that will prove to your executives that their investment actually worked. We're tackling that budget review together, and we're going to win it.
Part 1. Defining the beast. What exactly is a governance program?
Well, the absolute fastest way to sync a program is a vague mandate. If you go in and just say, hey, we need to govern our data better, you're essentially asking for a blank check with zero clear deliverables. A program is not a buzzword. Think of it as the accountable, enterprise-wide capability that defines and enforces how data is owned, described, quality-controlled, protected, and used. Notice those active verbs: defines and enforces. And the definitive outcomes: trust and safely exploit. It's not just about locking data down in a vault. It's about empowering your enterprise to actually use it confidently. This is the formal definition you should literally copy and paste right into your charter. When you're trying to explain this to non-technical stakeholders, use this analogy. A governance program is like a permanent city building code department. It sets the rules. It's not a temporary construction project that eventually finishes up and hands over the keys. A construction site is a one-off build, but your building code department, that's a standing capability. It sets the standards, inspects the work, certifies the safety, and evolves the rules as the city grows. Your data governance program is that permanent department because data never stops flowing.
Okay, Part 2. Building the fences, the scope boundary.
A governance program without clear boundaries will either try to boil the ocean and fail, or it'll become the scapegoat for literally every IT outage in the company. We have to draw some firm lines. Think of your scope boundary divided into 3 critical zones. First, what you explicitly own, things like data policies, roles, metadata, and data quality rules. Second, what you share, responsibilities like privacy, security, and lineage, which you handle alongside your legal or engineering teams. And third, what governance strictly excludes. You absolutely do not build physical infrastructure, run the network, or write application code. You set the rules, you do not run the pipes. So, the crucial point here is that this written scope acts as your absolute shield. When someone inevitably claims that governance failed just because an application server crashed on a Friday night, and they will, you have this boundary to point to. In a corporate environment, especially in heavily regulated sectors, finger-pointing is a real risk. By defining exactly what is out of scope in your charter, you protect your team's focus, you ensure your budget is actually spent on governance, and you prevent yourself from losing your weekends to shadow IT work. Let's move on to Part 3, the Great Clarification: Governance versus Data Management. We really need to draw a hard, professional line between setting the rules and actually running those pipes. If you confuse these terms in a meeting with your chief data officer, you will instantly lose credibility. So here is a simple test to mark you as a seasoned practitioner. If a task decides accountability and standards, it's governance. But if it involves physically building and running the systems, that's data management. And what about a governance project? Well, that's just a time-boxed, bounded effort inside your continuous program, like spending 3 months rolling out a brand new data catalog. Understanding this distinction ensures you hire the right people. Governance needs diplomats, rulemakers, and business analysts. Data management needs engineers and architects.
Part 4. Passing the sponsor test. Measurable success criteria.
Vague promises like improving our data culture absolutely do not win corporate budgets. We need to talk about hard metrics. Every executive sponsor holding the purse strings is going to ask you one fundamental question. How will we know this actually worked? If you answer with fluffy aspirations, your funding will be reallocated. I want you to imagine your executive sponsor reading your success criteria aloud in a board meeting a year from now. If they can't measure it by a specific date, it's merely an aspiration. The sponsor test requires you to be ruthlessly specific. And here is the exact blueprint to pass that test: a success scorecard. You want to measure success through hard percentages. For example, you might place a 25% weight on adoption, meaning a specific percentage of your critical data sets must have a named owner and a catalog entry within 12 months. Or maybe a 22% weight on a measured lift in data quality. Allocate 20% to measurable risk reduction of ungoverned sensitive data. Factor in time to data for your analysts and audit readiness for the regulators. These aren't guesses. These are undeniable, provable metrics.
Part 5. Navigating reality, scope creep, and regional rules.
Now, even with perfect definitions and metrics, you're going to face two massive external pressures in the real world once your program actually gets off the ground. The first is a silent killer called scope creep. Imagine tracking your program's value on a chart. When you start with a pilot and move to one single domain, value rises steadily. But the moment you say yes to governing all enterprise data at once, boom! The team gets spread too thin, quality completely drops, and the program's value collapses dramatically. Sponsor confidence gets destroyed. You absolutely must treat scope discipline as a value protector, growing only in deliberate, measurable increments. The second pressure is regional. Your definition of success actually has to dynamically shift depending on your geography. If you're in the EU, provable compliance and auditability under GDPR or DORA is your #1 criteria. But in the US, it's much more about minimizing litigation exposure and maximizing shareholder value, often driven by strict regulations for banking models. And if you're in India, it's about speed to a defensible baseline under the new DPDP Act. Your charter must reflect the dominant regulatory driver of your specific region if you want it to be truly effective.
So we built the fences, and we've defined the hard metrics. But you know, a charter is really just a piece of paper without the right people held accountable to it. Who is actually going to enforce these rules on the ground when the board meeting ends and the real work begins? Well, in Chapter 3, we'll answer exactly that by dissecting governance versus stewardship versus management. Until then, I want you to ask yourself a question. If a critical data pipeline broke at your company today, would your executives know exactly whose fault it wasn't? Thanks for joining, and I'll see you in Chapter 3.
Welcome back to this premium Durga Analytics Masterclass session. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you're an aspiring or working data governance lead, a data owner, an architect, or maybe a risk professional, you are in exactly the right place. You know, in my decades of experience standing up governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises, I can tell you one thing for absolute certain. You can have the most expensive, cutting-edge technology in the world, but if you don't know who is actually supposed to do what, your program is going to stall. It's that simple. Today, we're going to fix that.
We've got a super clear roadmap for today's explainer. We'll quickly touch on our course context, then dive into the 4 core roles: the absolute must-know difference between accountability and responsibility, something I call the authority trap, a real-world scenario of these roles in action, and finally, some regional governance variations. Let's jump right in.
All right, Section 1. Before we start defining who does what, let's take just a quick second to orient ourselves within the broader curriculum. As a quick reminder, you and I are on a massive sequence journey together, 21 modules, 529 chapters in total. We're covering the whole shebang, from building operating models, policies, and metadata catalogs, all the way through data quality, master data, privacy controls, lineage, cloud, and even responsible AI. But right now, we are zooming precisely into Module 1, Chapter 3, Roles and Accountability. This right here, this is the foundational bedrock because, let's be real, you absolutely cannot build a modern data platform or a data mesh without first nailing down the people part of the equation that we're covering today. Okay, moving to Section 2, let's talk about the 4 core roles, because a governance program, no matter how brilliantly it's designed on a whiteboard, needs actual human beings to execute it. Let's map out our foundational cast of characters. Every successful governance program, and I mean every single one, rests on 4 key pillars. We have the data owner, the data steward, the data custodian, and the governance lead. Now, the owner is strictly about accountability. The steward, they handle the meaning and the business rules. The custodian physically operates the systems, and the lead runs the overarching program. If you mix these up, or if people are wearing the wrong hats, your data program will literally grind to a halt. To really ground these concepts, let's use a real-world analogy. Picture a super busy, popular restaurant. The data owner? Well, they are the restaurant owner. They're the senior business leader who answers directly to the health inspectors and has their name on the license hanging on the wall. Now, they probably aren't in the kitchen chopping onions every day, right? But if someone gets food poisoning, they are the one who carries the ultimate can. They are entirely answerable.
Next up, we have the data steward. In our restaurant, this is the head chef. They're the ones deciding the recipes, making sure the ingredients coming in are fresh, and checking the quality of the dishes leaving the kitchen on a day-to-day basis. Translated to the data world, they curate the actual meaning, define the business rules, and ensure the quality of the data. They are your hands-on subject matter experts who execute the framework. Then comes the data custodian. Think of them as the kitchen engineer or the head of maintenance. They aren't writing the menu, and they certainly aren't the ones the health inspector is going to find. Their job is strictly to keep the ovens hot and the fridges ice cold. In your enterprise, this is the IT or engineering role. They are responsible for operating and maintaining the physical systems, the databases, and the pipelines where the data actually lives. Finally, we have the governance lead. This is the operations manager who makes sure everything runs smoothly across all the different restaurant branches. They own the governance program itself. I mean, just imagine the disaster if your kitchen maintenance guy tried to set the gourmet menu, or if your head chef tried to fix a broken compressor on the walk-in fridge. Confusing these roles is a recipe for a completely broken kitchen. Each role has a highly distinct, non-overlapping boundary. So, moving to Section 3, we're getting into the philosophical core of this chapter. If you take away just one single concept from our session today, please let it be this next distinction. The absolute most crucial point in all of data governance is understanding the difference between 2 words: accountability and responsibility. They get muddled all the time, but they are entirely different animals. Accountability means ultimate answerability. The buck stops here. It sits with one senior person, and it absolutely positively cannot be delegated. A data owner is accountable. Responsibility, on the flip side, is the duty to perform the hands-on work. That can be shared across a whole team of people, and it can be delegated. Stewards and custodians are responsible. To put it simply, the owner decides and the stewards and custodians do. When we actually look at where these different roles spend their working hours, a really clear, fascinating dynamic emerges. The data owner actually spends very little time on daily tactical data tasks,
but their time is spent making crucial, high-stakes decisions and, most importantly, securing funding. Meanwhile, the custodians and the stewards spend the vast majority of their time doing the heavy lifting, the hands-on curation and operations. Accountability doesn't actually require a massive time commitment. What it requires is authority.
And that brings us to Section 4, which introduces the primary villain of enterprise data governance programs. I have personally seen this single issue cause countless expensive data initiatives to completely fail in their very first year. A role without authority fails. We call this the accountability without authority trap. Imagine, just for a second, a data steward who is told to go fix data quality, but they have absolutely no authority to change how the source systems actually capture that data. What's going to happen? They are going to fail. And worse, it'll look like it was their fault. Think about your own organization right now. Are your stewards truly empowered, or are they trapped? You must always define the data owner first. If a steward hits a wall, they need a clear escalation path upward to an owner who actually possesses the institutional power and the budget to authorize a real fix. Because responsibility without authority, that's a dead end.
All right, Section 5. Let's take all of this great theory and apply it to a real-world, high-stakes scenario so you can see exactly how the gears mesh together. Let's look at a major bank dealing with a critical issue. The bank finds duplicate counterparty records, which is artificially inflating its risk exposure to a single client. Yikes. Here is how the roles perfectly interact to solve it without overstepping. Step 1. The data steward spots the duplicates during a routine quality check and raises the alarm. Step 2. The data custodian, our IT side, investigates the technical plumbing and confirms the records are bleeding in from two different source systems that were never properly reconciled. Step 3. The data owner steps in. They make the tough executive decision that the counterparty domain will use a single golden record, and crucially, they sign the check for IT to build that fix. Finally, Step 4. The governance lead steps back, looks at the big picture, and ensures this new control mechanism is applied across all data domains, not just this one isolated incident. Boom. Everyone did their exact, specific job.
Almost at the finish line here with Section 6. I want to point out that while these 4 core jobs are completely universal, the way they are implemented, and sometimes what they're called, can shift pretty significantly depending on your local regulatory landscape. Depending on where you operate in the world, the emphasis naturally changes. In the European Union, it is highly formal and incredibly accountability heavy. I mean, regulators may literally ask you to physically produce the named data owner of a reported figure under frameworks like BCBS 239 or GDPR. In the US, the approach tends to be a bit more business-led, where stewardship is frequently embedded right directly into agile data and analytics teams. And over in India, the approach is emerging and highly pragmatic as the new DPDP Act and RBI regulations mature, with custodian duties getting heavily scrutinized under RBI outsourcing rules. But listen, underneath all those localized titles and varying regulations, the 4 core jobs, owner, steward, custodian, and lead, they remain exactly the same. So now that we know exactly who the key players are, the next logical question is, how on earth do we organize them? Before you click over to the next chapter, I want you to ask yourself a tough question. If a critical data breach happened at your company today, this afternoon, would your people know immediately who holds the ultimate accountability? Or would they just start pointing fingers at each other? Well, in Chapter 4, Data Governance Operating Models, we are going to arrange these exact roles we just learned into centralized, federated, and hybrid structures so that finger-pointing becomes a thing of the past. It's going to be a great one. I'll see you there.
Welcome back to the Durga Analytics Enterprise Data Governance Masterclass. We're all about taking those massive, complex concepts and transforming them into practical, job-ready frameworks that you can actually use. I am absolutely thrilled to be your guide today. If you're an aspiring or working data governance lead, a data owner, steward, architect, platform engineer, or maybe a privacy and compliance officer, you are in exactly the right place. We're bringing decades of hands-on experience, designing and running governance programs across highly regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises directly to you. Just to set the stage and give you some context on where we are in our journey, our entire roadmap spans 21 modules and 529 comprehensive chapters. We're covering everything from the very foundations of why governance even exists, all the way through policies, metadata, master data, architecture, privacy, cloud integration, responsible AI, and capping it off with a fully functional data quality masterclass. And every single module is grounded in vendor-neutral practice with a regulated finance overlay. But today we are laser-focused on Module 1, Foundations of Enterprise Data Governance.
Specifically, we are diving into Chapter 4 to define exactly what an operating model is. Put simply, this is the organizational structure that dictates where governance authority and roles actually sit across your enterprise. In Chapter 3, we name the key players, right? The data owner, the data steward, the data custodian, the governance lead. You have the roles. But now, how do you actually arrange them across a massive, complex enterprise? Do they all cluster at the center? Do they get pushed out to the specific domains? Or is it some kind of blend? Well, that is your operating model.
Here is our quick roadmap for this explainer. We're going to explore the 3 core models, use a really fun supermarket analogy to make them concrete, analyze the trade-offs to find your firm's best fit, and finally, adapt these models to specific global contexts. Let's get into it.
First up, the 3 core models: centralized, federated, and hybrid.
When you look at typical enterprise fit, the hybrid model just completely blows past the centralized and federated approaches for large organizations, usually scoring an impressive 85 out of 100. And there's a good reason for that. It achieves this high mark because it perfectly balances the load. We basically have 3 main choices. First, a centralized model, where a single central team sets and enforces literally everything. Second, a federated model, where business domains basically govern their own data within some shared standards. And third, this highly effective hybrid model, which keeps a strong central core for standards, but pushes the actual day-to-day execution out to the business domains.
All right, moving on to Section 2. Let's make sense of this structure using our supermarket analogy. To make these abstract models instantly relatable, especially when you're trying to explain them to your data owners and platform engineers, I want you to imagine that you run a massive national grocery empire. A centralized chain is where the head office dictates every single shelf layout everywhere in the country. It is incredibly consistent, sure, but it is way too slow to adapt. If a local store needs to stock up on umbrellas because of a sudden storm, they're stuck waiting on corporate approval. On the flip side, a federated chain lets each local store decide everything completely independently. It's incredibly fast locally, but man, it gets chaotic and disjointed across the national brand. You completely lose your economies of scale. And this brings us to the beauty of the third option. Almost every single wildly successful large supermarket chain, and honestly, almost every successful enterprise governance program uses this hybrid approach. A hybrid chain sets the brand standards centrally. The logo, the food safety rules, the core product range, all decided at the top. But then, it lets the local stores adapt the rest to fit their specific neighborhood. Keep the rulebook central and the actual execution local. So, that leads us right into Section 3, trade-offs and firm fit. How do we balance consistency and speed?
Let's analyze the practical data to see how this builds on our analogy. The trade-offs you face in the real world are super clear here. A centralized setup absolutely maximizes consistency. It's rock solid. But local speed totally tanks. At a large scale, a central team just becomes a massive bottleneck. Then you look at federated. It's lightning fast locally, but there's a glaring drop in consistency, which brings a huge risk of duplicated effort across the company. But hybrid? It gives you strong consistency, great speed, and excellent scalability, with only moderate coordination costs. It really is the balanced path.
But look, context is everything. If we map this out to actual firm profiles, you'll see this isn't a universal one-size-fits-all rule. A small firm with just a single data domain can absolutely run a centralized model. One team can govern everything just fine. Or if you're an integrated energy trading major with highly autonomous divisions, you might actually lean federated because your domains need absolute control over their books, held only to shared reference data standards. But for a large multi-region bank with dozens of domains, you will literally drown a central team. For those, hybrid is the absolutely necessary choice so that central standards and local delivery can scale up together. So the single most crucial takeaway here for large regulated enterprises is this simple mantra: central rulebook, local doing. A hybrid model gives you a central rulebook for those really strict compliance needs. Think BCBS 239 or GDPR, while still empowering local doing so you keep your speed. A purely central team cannot possibly know every domain's data intimately, and purely federated domains will eventually just drift apart into total chaos. Hybrid is your anchor.
Let's wrap up with Section 4, Adapting to Global Regions, because real-world context adds a lot of nuance here.
Geographic borders completely change the game. Over in the European Union, incredibly strict GDPR rules and the need to respect cross-border data residency practically force strong central standards, with execution federated only within specific countries. The United States, conversely, is heavily business unit-driven. You see very strong federated autonomy, and the central function is mostly there just to coordinate standards and complex regulatory reporting like SR 11.7. And then India is fascinating. Firms there often centralize early on as they mature, heavily driven by strict RBI outsourcing rules and in-country data localization before they eventually federate out as they grow. You simply have to adapt your model to the regulatory reality on the ground.
And that brings us to a really provocative question that perfectly bridges our frameworks. We've spent all this time figuring out exactly where governance sits. You know your operating model now. But who is actually accountable versus merely responsible for the data? How do you map actual human responsibilities across a sprawling hybrid organization without creating total chaos?
Well, that's exactly what we are going to tackle next. Join me in our next explainer, Chapter 05, where we'll build a comprehensive RACI matrix to nail down data ownership versus accountability. Until then, I want you to ask yourself, in your current organization, do you actually know who owns the data, or is everyone just passing the buck? Remember, keep your rulebook central, your doing local, and I will see you in the next chapter.
Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. If we haven't crossed paths yet, I'm your host and resident enterprise data governance expert here at Durga Analytics. Over the last couple of decades, I've been in the trenches designing and running governance programs across some pretty intense environments. Think highly regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management. We're talking about standing up operating models, untangling messy metadata, and really just teaching folks how to make governance actually work in the real world. Today's masterclass, well, it's going to be incredibly hands-on because we are tackling the absolute sharpest tool in your entire governance toolkit to finally eliminate ambiguity. Before we jump in, let's just do a quick reality check on where we are in the big picture. As you know, this enterprise data governance course is a massive sequence journey. We've got 21 modules covering the whole shebang. We started the foundations in modules 1 through 5, move through architecture and data products, jump into tooling and cloud mesh, and wrap it all up with metrics, responsible AI, and certification. It's a complete job-ready framework. So here's our roadmap for today, the governance course journey, defining the RACI matrix, the one accountable rule, building a bank RACI, resolving real ownership disputes, and finally, RACI across global regions. Let's get to it. Section 1, the governance course journey, zooming into Chapter 5. All right, zooming in from that macro view, we're currently sitting right here in Module 1, Chapter 5, Data Ownership versus Accountability. In our last few chapters, we mapped out roles, owners, stewards, custodians. But let's be real, handing out fancy titles doesn't actually get the job done. Those titles mean absolutely nothing until you can pinpoint exactly who does what for any given activity. That's why we're here today, to cure that dreaded "I thought you had it" syndrome once and for all. Section 2. Defining the RACI matrix. The wedding analogy. Now, before I start throwing massive corporate grids at you, let's look at a real-world scenario to really make this concept stick. Think about planning a wedding. You've got the caterer, right? They're in the kitchen, cooking the food, plating it, serving it. But if that food comes out completely cold, whose big day is ruined? The couple's. The caterer is responsible for doing the actual work, but the couple, they are accountable. It's their day, their ultimate call. You might consult the parents on the guest list, and you just inform distant relatives about the date. Chaos at a wedding, just like in a data governance program, usually happens when two people think they're accountable for the exact same thing, or worse, when nobody is. Okay, let's lock in these definitions. Responsible. That's the R in RACI. This is the role that's rolling up their sleeves and doing the actual work of an activity. And the really crucial thing to remember here, responsibility can totally be shared. You could have a whole team of engineers who are all responsible for building a data pipeline. They are the doers. Accountable, on the other hand, the A in our matrix, is a completely different beast. This is your ultimate owner, the one single person who answers for the outcome. Think about it. If a regulator comes knocking because a risk figure is way off, they don't want to chat with the 5 engineers who built the pipeline. No way. They want the senior business person who owns that data domain. Accountability is where the buck stops, and it absolutely cannot be delegated. Just to round out the rest of the acronym, consulted means you're actively seeking someone's input before the work gets done. And informed, well, that just means they get a heads up about the outcome after the fact. No active input needed, just a courtesy FYI. Section 3. The one accountable rule. The rule that saves programs. All right, this is where I put on my strict program director hat. I literally called this the rule that saves programs. If you look at your RACI grid and you scan a row for an activity, let's say defining a data policy, and there is no A assigned, I guarantee that task is going to fall right through the cracks because nobody has to answer for it. Now, if you scan a row and there are 2 A's, that's almost worse because everyone just assumes the other person is handling it. So write this down. The one accountable rule states there is one and only one accountable role per row, every single time. Trust me, it's a total lifesaver. Section 4, building a bank RACI, putting it into practice. Let's actually put these theories into practice. Now, what's really interesting here is how visually striking the accountability is when you map it out. You've got activities down the side, roles across the top. Look at those teal cells. Those are your accountable roles. And notice how, as your eyes track left to right across any single row, there is exactly 1 teal block. Not 0, not 2, exactly 1. The amber cells, meanwhile, show us who is responsible for the heavy lifting. Let's break down this super realistic slice of a banking RACI. Look at the very first row for a second. Defining a policy. The owner is accountable, right? But the steward and the governance lead actually share the responsibility of writing the thing. Now, jump down to fixing a data issue. Notice the shift there? Suddenly, the data steward is accountable. Why? Because they're the closest to the business logic, so they know what a correct value actually means, while the IT custodian is responsible for executing the back-end fix. But look what happens when we talk about granting access to data or reporting a figure to a regulator. Boom, accountability snaps right back to the data owner. Setting it up this way makes ownership precise, actionable, and completely defensible. Section 5. Resolving real ownership disputes. A live scenario. You know, over my years at Durga Analytics, I've sat in countless meeting rooms watching teams go absolutely at each other's throats over this stuff. So here's a classic scenario for you, and a very real headache. You've got two teams arguing over who gets to approve access to a highly sensitive data set. Security thinks they should do it. IT thinks it's their call because, hey, they manage the server. And the business team, they're saying, it's our data. So who actually decides?
Listen, without a RACI, you are stuck in a 2-hour meeting relitigating corporate politics. But with a RACI, you don't even argue. You just point to the grid. The data owner is accountable for the access decision. The custodian is responsible for actually provisioning that access in the system. And security? They're simply consulted to make sure the protocols are met. Boom. That dispute is entirely dissolved in about 30 seconds. So the crucial takeaway here is exactly this. A RACI is simply a pre-agreed answer to future arguments. You're doing the hard, messy work of negotiating who owns what during peacetime. That way, when a crisis inevitably hits or dispute pops up, you aren't wasting precious time figuring out who's in charge. You already know.
Section 6, RACI across global regions, scaling governance.
Now, while RACIs is obviously a fantastic internal management tool, it is also a vital compliance shield globally, and this is where it gets really interesting to see how it adapts. In the European Union, accountability is literally evidence. Regulators will ask to see your RACI as a formal audit artifact to know exactly who was accountable for a reported figure. Over in the US, RACIs map that accountability directly to business line owners, which is huge for litigation defensibility and meeting really stringent model risk requirements like SR 11.7. And in India, with the growing expectations of the RBI and the new DPDP data protection laws, formalizing RACIs is rapidly becoming a non-negotiable practice, especially for clarifying those IT custodian roles when dealing with outsourcing. To wrap this all up, just remember that a RACI matrix is what breathes life into your operating model. It assigns those R's, AC's, and I's. It strictly enforces that one accountable rule, and it gives you that pre-agreed answer to future disputes. But I want to leave you with this one provocative thought. If you were to audit your own team's top 5 critical data activities right this second, would every single one have a designated undisputed A? If your answer is no, well, you know exactly where to start tomorrow morning. Next up on our journey, we're diving into Chapter 6, the governance lifecycle, where we'll see how policies actually flow from a rough draft all the way to enforcement. Until then, keep your accountability crystal clear, and I'll catch you in the next explainer. Welcome back, aspiring data governance leads, data owners, stewards, and architects. I'm your expert guide from Durga Analytics. Over my decades of standing up governance operating models across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management, I've honestly seen it all. And today, I am thrilled to dive into another explainer with you. We're focusing squarely on Module 1, Chapter 6 of our Enterprise Data Governance curriculum, the governance lifecycle. Now, just to ground us before we really get going, remember that this explainer is part of a massive, sequenced journey. We're navigating together across 21 modules and 529 chapters. We're covering literally everything from the foundations of why governance exists and building operating models, all the way to metadata, data quality, privacy, cloud data mesh, and even a functional data quality masterclass. But right now, we are squarely focused right here on Module 01, Chapter 6, Governance Lifecycle. Here is our quick agenda for this session. We'll start with a course roadmap and intro, then explore the governance lifecycle loop. Next, we'll break down policy, standard, and control. After that, we're going to run a real-world audit test, look at global regulator expectations, and finish up with a review and some next steps. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Course Roadmap and Intro. Moving right along to Section 2, the Governance Lifecycle Loop. Okay, here is the absolute most crucial takeaway you need right from the start. Governance is not a document you write once. I see this all the time. Just writing a rule on paper, it doesn't magically change how people handle data. We actually need a continuous process that changes behavior. Think of it as a maturity curve, a 5-stage life cycle loop.
It's how we take a great idea and intent and turn it into enforced, measurable reality. Every single rule starts at the bottom as a policy. This is just a simple statement of intent, like personal data must be protected. But then it matures. It moves up to become a standard, making that intent concrete. Next is enforcement, where we actually put a control in place. Then comes monitoring, where we actively watch that control. And finally, review, where we update the rule as the world changes. Then the whole loop repeats. The rule gains strength and maturity at every single step.
Think about it like road safety. It brilliantly illustrates the concept in a way everyone gets. Step 1, a government decides roads should be safe. That's your policy. Step 2, it sets a 50-kilometer-per-hour limit. That's your standard. Step 3, it installs speed cameras. Boom, that is your enforcement. Governance without enforcement is literally just a speed limit sign with no camera. It changes absolutely nothing. People are still going to speed.
Which brings us to Section 3, Policy, Standard, and Control. Let's really lock down the differences between these top 3 layers because it's absolutely crucial. Policy, it says why. It's your high-level intent, like protect personal data. And honestly, it rarely changes. The standard says what. That's your concrete, testable rule. Something like PII fields must be encrypted and access locked. Then you have the control, which is the how. It's the actual mechanism enforcing it, like encryption applied, log alerts on access. You absolutely need all 3 of these working together. And look, this leads us to a classic beginner mistake. So many folks will write a massive, thick policy document, drop it on a corporate shared drive, and declare governance done. Hands washed, right? No way. Without standards and controls beneath it, that policy is just a wish. The true value of your data governance program lives way down in the lower layers that actually touch the enterprise data. Let's see this in action. Section 4, the real-world audit test.
Let's pull this out of the theoretical realm for a second. Imagine you're working at a huge bank dealing with counterparty data, and the auditors just walked in. Here's how a single rule flows through the full loop. Step 1, policy. Critical data must be accurate. Step 2, standard. Counterparty records must have a valid non-null ID. Step 3, enforcement. We build a validation control that straight up rejects records with a missing ID at entry. Step 4, monitoring. We run a daily scorecard tracking the percentage of valid IDs. And Step 5, review. When a new identifier scheme drops in the industry, we update our standard, and the loop repeats. So, when those auditors are sitting across the desk from you, they are going to hit you with 3 ultimate test questions. 1, what is the standard? 2, what control enforces it? And 3, what evidence proves the control actually works? If you can't answer all 3 of those, well, your policy is just decorative window dressing. I really want you to remember this quote. Audit readiness lives in the lower 3 layers, not the policy PDF. An unenforced policy is actually worse than having no policy at all, for sure. Why? Because it creates a false sense of safety. Everyone assumes the data is protected because some PDF says so. But that gap between your written policy and operational reality, that is an automatic audit finding. This leads us nicely into Section 5, Global Regulator Expectations. Now, you might be wondering, is this really how it works out in the field? Oh, absolutely. This isn't just theory, it's the law. Take the European Union. Under GDPR and DORA, regulators expect evidence at every single layer. They actively probe your enforcement. Missing control evidence is a strict finding. In the US, SOX-style testing demands you show that controls actually operate over time, not just that they exist on paper. And in India, regulators like the RBI and the DPDP are pushing aggressively for maturing enforcement, heavily demanding solid, demonstrable monitoring evidence. You just can't hide behind a policy document anymore. All right, let's wrap things up with Section 6, Review and Next Steps. We've covered a ton of ground today, so let's make sure you're ready for the real world.
Say you're applying for a governance role at a regulated retail bank. Let's do a little interview prep. The hiring manager asks, why is an unenforced policy worse than no policy? Think about what we just discussed. Here's your strong answer. It creates a false sense of safety. People just assume the data is safe, but there's actually no control and no monitoring evidence backing it up. So when the regulator says, show me this is happening, you fail instantly. That massive gap between your written policy and reality is itself a huge regulatory finding. Okay, one final review question, and this one is perfect for any entry-level closer role at a large regulated enterprise. Why is the governance lifecycle a loop rather than a straight line? And here is how you hit the nail on the head. Because the world changes. New regulations drop, new data types emerge, risks evolve. A rule that's set once and never revisited goes completely stale. The review stage feeds the next cycle, updating policies, standards, and controls so your governance keeps matching reality. It is a living loop, not some static document you finish and forget about.
And that wraps up our explainer for Module 1, Chapter 6. Coming up next, we're diving into Chapter 07, Business Drivers. We'll be exploring the real-world forces like regulation, analytics, M&A, and cloud migration that actually trigger these governance programs. But before you jump to the next chapter, ask yourself this. If an auditor walked into your office today and demanded evidence, how many of your company's policies would actually survive the test? And how many are just empty wishes? See you in Chapter 7.
Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're looking to really master the art and science of enterprise data, you are absolutely in the right place. I'm your host, an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics, and I've spent decades standing up governance programs across banking, energy trading, you name it. And I am thrilled to guide you through this explainer today. We're tackling a pretty fundamental truth of our industry right now. Governance programs, they rarely just start on their own. They don't magically appear out of thin air. Something triggers them. So in today's session, Chapter 07, Business Drivers, we're going to figure out exactly how to identify those triggering events and, more importantly, how to use that knowledge to actually get your program funded. Okay, let's dive right in.
Real quick, just to give you a map of where we are. As you probably know by now, this enterprise data governance course is a massive, carefully sequenced journey. We are navigating 21 modules and 529 chapters together. Down the road, we'll get into the weeds of metadata catalogs, privacy controls, cloud governance, the whole shebang. But right now, we're laying the absolute groundwork in Module 01, Foundations of Enterprise Data Governance. Look, if we don't understand the why, like why governance exists and how it actually gets paid for, all those advanced cloud capabilities are literally never going to make it off the whiteboard.
So here's our game plan for this chapter. We just knocked out the course context. Next, we'll use the tidy garage analogy to understand triggers. Then, we'll break down the 4 big governance drivers dominating the industry today. After that, we'll get super practical on framing your business case, explore some global nuances, and finish up with a high-stakes interview scenario to test what we've learned.
All right, Section 1, the tidy garage analogy.
Let's start with a really foundational concept. The honest truth is, nobody governs data just for fun, right? An enterprise doesn't just wake up one Tuesday and decide to drop millions of dollars on data stewardship out of the goodness of their hearts. They need a reason, a trigger. And I think the tidy garage analogy hits the nail on the head here. Think about it. When do you actually clean out a completely trashed garage? Well, you do it when the city inspector is coming. That's regulation. You do it when you desperately need to find a tool, like right now. That's analytics. You do it when your partner moves in and you're merging all your stuff. That's M&A. Or you do it when you're literally packing up and moving to a new house. That's cloud migration. The mess was always there, just like the bad data in your corporate systems, but it's that specific event that finally forces you to act.
Now, there is a really critical distinction we need to make here between a force and a driver. A force is a standing structural condition. It's the environment. Like AI reshaping how we use data, that's a force. It's the why.
But a driver? A driver is a concrete triggering event that actually launches or funds a program. It's the when. So a stalled AI initiative because your models are hallucinating on garbage data, that is a driver. Forces create the background weather, sure, but drivers are what actually get your governance program a budget.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 4 governance drivers.
So how does this actually translate to our daily operations? Let's get our official definition straight. A business driver is the event or pressure that makes a firm start or fund a governance program now rather than later. It is the immediate, burning pain point. And if you're a data governance lead or a data architect, your number one job when you walk into a new organization is to diagnose that driver immediately.
So what are the biggest triggers out there? Check out these numbers. Regulation is the absolute heavyweight, driving about 38% of programs, especially if you're in heavily regulated spaces like banking. But look what's catching up fast. Analytics and AI at 24%, because they desperately demand trustworthy data to even function. Then you've got mergers and acquisitions at 15%, which forces companies to quickly untangle two totally different data estates. And finally, cloud migration at 14%, which scatters data everywhere and forces you to build controls in from day one.
Now you might be wondering, why does regulation always take that top spot? Well, it's because regulation is what we call the ultimate forcing function. It creates a rock-solid deadline paired with the very real threat of massive financial fines. Executives literally cannot ignore it. An internal analytics program? Sure, that can be delayed. But a mandate from the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank? No way. That hard deadline creates undeniable, immediate urgency.
Okay, let's pivot to Section 3, framing your business case.
Understanding the theory behind drivers is great, but how do we actually use this to get money? This is where the rubber meets the road. The driver completely dictates how you sell the program. If the symptom is a new regulatory deadline, your driver is regulation. So you absolutely must lead your business case with compliance and fine avoidance. But if your symptom is post-merger chaos and you've got duplicate customers everywhere, your driver is M&A. In that case, you do not talk to the board about compliance. You lead with rapid reconciliation and reporting. You have to diagnose the driver first and then speak its exact language.
Let's look at the analytics and AI driver as an example, because that is just exploding right now. To unblock an AI initiative, you have to provide something called data provenance. This is just the documented origin and history of a dataset, where it came from, how it was made. Listen, AI teams absolutely cannot deploy a trading algorithm or a credit risk model if the training data has no clear provenance. When you explain to leadership that governance provides this trustworthy, documented data, you suddenly stop being seen as a roadblock and you become the essential key to unlocking their entire AI roadmap.
Moving into Section 4, Global Drivers and Nuances.
For those of you working in multinationals, you've got to know that these drivers aren't a one-size-fits-all across the globe. In the European Union, regulation heavily leads the pack. Frameworks like GDPR and DORA are constantly triggering programs. But over in the US, analytics, AI, and a super active M&A market take the lead, along with a massive push for cloud-first strategies. And then look at India. It's this fascinating mix. You've got explosive digital growth pushing analytics, combined with a brand new regulatory driver in the DPDP Act. So the takeaway here? You absolutely must tailor your pitch to the region you're actually operating in.
And finally, Section 5, Summary and Interview Prep.
All right, we've covered a ton of ground today. Let's put this into practice. Imagine you're sitting in an interview for a big data governance lead role at a large asset manager. The hiring manager leans across the table and says, "Our AI program is stalled on data problems. How do you frame governance here?" Think back to our cheat sheet. How are you going to secure that buy-in?
Here is exactly how you nail that answer and get the job. You look at them and say, the driver here is analytics and AI, not regulation. So I'm going to lead my business case with unblocking the AI roadmap. AI models require trustworthy, well-described data with clear provenance, and governance provides exactly that. Boom.
You make compliance a supporting benefit, not the headline. Naming the real driver, which is speed to trustworthy insight, is what wins funding from a business unit that, frankly, only cares about the AI outcome.
Let's do a quick recap to lock all this in. A business driver is the now event that forces a company to act. There are four main ones: regulation, analytics and AI, M&A, and cloud migration. Regulation is usually your strongest forcing function because of those hard deadlines. Remember to always diagnose the dominant driver and frame your business case using its specific language. And lastly, those drivers are going to shift depending on where you are in the world.
Honestly, mastering your business case is the literal difference between a governance program that just exists on paper and one that actually transforms an enterprise. But now that you know how to get millions of dollars in funding, you've got a terrifying new problem on your hands. You cannot govern an entire global enterprise all at once. If you try to boil the ocean, you will fail. So where exactly do you draw the line? Well, that high-stakes decision brings us right into our next session, Chapter 08, Data Domains, Boundaries, and Prioritization. I'll see you there.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics, and let me tell you, over my decades of designing and running governance programs, whether that's been in regulated banking, energy trading, or asset management, I've seen it all. From standing up operating models to untangling massive data meshes, I am incredibly excited to guide you through today's explainer. We're tackling what is honestly a make-or-break challenge in our field, logically carving up a massive corporate data estate. Because look, if you've ever stared down an enterprise's entire data landscape and just felt completely paralyzed by the sheer scale of it, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to learn how to take that absolute mountain of data and break it down into manageable, governable pieces.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the data governance journey, where it all begins. So, the absolute quickest way to fail in data governance is trying to govern everything all at once. We call this boiling the ocean, and trust me, it's a guaranteed recipe for scope creep, totally exhausted teams, and some very frustrated stakeholders. To beat this, we need a highly systematic approach, which is exactly why we follow a structured journey. As professionals, you know enterprise data governance isn't just one siloed thing, right? It's a massive interconnected ecosystem. Our entire Durga Analytics masterclass spans 21 modules in 529 chapters. I mean, we cover the whole shebang. We go from the absolute foundations of why governance even exists, through policies, metadata, data quality, master data, privacy, data mesh, all the way to metrics, responsible AI, and full-scale program implementation and certification. Everything is grounded in vendor-neutral, regulated finance realities.
And right now, just to orient us, you are here. Module 1, Chapter 8, Data Domains, Boundaries, and Domain Prioritization. We're still in the Foundations module. Why? Well, because this chapter is literally the direct antidote to that scope creep we were just talking about. You've already learned what to govern and why to govern it. Today, you're going to learn exactly how to slice it up so you can actually execute your strategy without losing your mind. Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We'll cover the governance journey, defining data domains, drawing boundaries, prioritizing value and risk, zooming in on critical data elements, and finally, defending your choices in the real world. All right, Section 2, defining your data domains. Let's talk about how we stop boiling the ocean. If we can't govern the whole enterprise at once, what exactly are we dividing it into? The answer is a data domain. By its strictest definition, a data domain is a coherent area of data that belongs together and, this is absolutely crucial, can have a single accountable owner. Think of broad, logical categories like customer data, product data, counterparty, or trade data. I really want to stop my foot on this requirement of a single accountable owner, because if an area of data cannot be assigned to one ultimate decision maker, it is simply not a properly defined domain, period. A really brilliant way to picture this is by thinking about city postal districts. Dividing up an estate into data domains is exactly like dividing a sprawling city into postal codes.
Every single district has a very clear boundary on the map and a strictly responsible mail carrier. Because of this structure, the mail actually arrives. Without these districts, deliveries either fall through the cracks completely, or you get two different carriers fighting over who covers the same street. Domains give every piece of your enterprise data a specific district and a dedicated carrier.
Which brings us right into Section 3, drawing clean domain boundaries. Because knowing what a domain is isn't enough. You have to draw the lines. Right, so knowing what a domain conceptually is won't totally save you in practice. You have to know exactly where to draw the physical lines around it. Fuzzy boundaries lead to ownership gaps, and those gaps cause the exact same organizational disputes we try to use RACI charts to avoid. So the crucial point here is how we define these boundaries. You must draw domains around business meaning, never around systems. Actually, scratch that. Let me emphasize it more. Never around IT systems. This is a massive trap IT-driven programs fall into. For instance, your counterparty data remains one single domain, even if it lives scattered across 10 different trading and settlement systems. The boundary follows what the data actually means, not where it happens to live on a server. That's the only way a single business owner can stay accountable for it.
Of course, we do have to acknowledge the messy reality of corporate data. What happens when things overlap? What about an entity that is both a customer and a counterparty? Or maybe a counterparty in a supplier? We call this cross-domain data. Because this spans two different districts, you cannot just leave it up to chance. You've got to establish explicit ownership rules that dictate exactly who is accountable for that overlap. It prevents internal friction and makes sure nothing gets ignored.
Moving on to Section 4, prioritizing value and risk, deciding where to start. Now, what's really interesting here is that once you've drawn all these beautiful domains, you still can't govern all of them on day one. You have to pick one to start with, and guessing just won't cut it. When we prioritize domains, we plot them against business value, regulatory risk, and effort. If you look at domains like counterparty and trade or transaction data, especially in a bank or trading firm, these plot incredibly high on both business value and regulatory risk. Customer data is right up there too, whereas employee or reference data might have varying degrees of value or risk depending on the firm. Using a visual framework like this turns subjective, emotional arguments into a purely objective strategy.
So let's break down the execution strategy for these 4 quadrants. It is super straightforward. High-value, high-risk domains, you govern those first, no debate. They are your absolute first targets to secure quick, highly visible wins. High-value, low-risk domains, you govern those next to unlock more business value. What about low-value, high-risk? Well, you govern those purely for compliance purposes, even if it's totally unglamorous. And those low-value, low-risk domains, you confidently defer them. Just push them down the roadmap.
All right, let's zoom in a bit for Section 5, critical data elements focus.
Now that we've prioritized our domain at a macro level, we need to shift our perspective from that broad domain view down to the microscopic anatomy of the data assets themselves. Because even within your highest priority domain, you still cannot govern every single data field. It's a massive waste of effort. Instead, you focus on critical data elements, or CDEs. A CDE is a specific field that directly drives money, risk, or regulatory reporting. Think of things like a legal entity identifier, currency type, or a notional amount. By governing just these critical few, you deliver the vast majority of the program's value, and you don't exhaust your stewards on meaningless fields. I mean, nobody needs a government's program to standardize the exact hex color of the corporate logo in a legacy HR database, right? It's also vital to realize that geographic and regulatory nuances are going to actively shift which specific domains and CDEs get pushed to the top of your priority list. For example, over in the European Union, regulations like BCBS 239 push risk and counterparty domains to the absolute top. In the US, the focus often leans heavily toward analytics value or litigation sensitivity, so customer and product domains get bumped up. And in India, the DPDP Act heavily prioritizes personal data domains and localized data. So remember, context is everything here.
Let's wrap up with Section 6, Defending Your Domain Choice. Time to face the music.
Let's bring all this theory into a high-stakes, real-world corporate scenario. You've done the heavy lifting, you've carved up the domains, you've picked your starting point, but now you have to defend it. Imagine you're sitting in an executive steering committee meeting. A critical sponsor looks across the table, stops the meeting, and asks you point blank, why on earth did you start this massive governance program with counterparty data instead of something else? You are in the hot seat. How do you respond? Well, you look them right in the eye and deliver this strong, evidence-based answer. Because it is high value, it directly drives our exposure and pricing, and it is exceptionally high risk, as our regulatory reporting depends entirely on it. By starting right here, a quick win proves the value of the entire governance program while simultaneously protecting the firm. Boom! Having a defensible, mathematically sound first choice is exactly what earns a data governance lead the credibility and the funding to expand to the next domain. And once you've actually earned that credibility, you need to know exactly who to put in charge of these prioritized domains. That brings us to the end of Chapter 8. What an incredibly powerful set of tools we've uncovered today. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. If your CEO pulled you aside tomorrow morning and asked which single undocumented data element could trigger a massive regulatory fine for your firm, would you know the answer? Think about that as you apply today's matrix to your own organization. Join us next time for Chapter 9, where we learn exactly how to identify and win over the stakeholders who actually make these domains governable. Catch you there. Welcome back, focused learners, to this Durga Analytics Explainer. With decades of experience designing data governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises, standing up everything from operating models and metadata capabilities to privacy controls and modern data platforms, I am beyond excited to be your expert trainer today. We're stepping into the trenches to adopt the tactical mindset you absolutely need as a data leader. Whether you're aiming to be a data governance lead, an architect, or a privacy officer, this is where the rubber meets the road. So let me ask you a question. How do you govern data when the people who own it don't actually report to you? Seriously, think about that for a second. It's the daily dilemma of almost every data professional. You're handed these massive enterprise-wide mandates like clean up this data or secure that pipeline, but you have absolutely zero direct authority over the engineering or business teams who actually have to do the work. You basically have accountability without any authority. Well, today we are going to fix that. Our tactical playbook covers 6 key areas: the course roadmap, navigating that lack of authority, mapping your stakeholders, securing an executive sponsor, converting resistors, and finally, some global nuances in interview prep. Let's dive right in. Starting off with Section 1, our course roadmap in Chapter Focus. Just a quick reminder of our overall course structure. The course name is Enterprise Data Governance, and it's a massive sequenced journey across 21 modules and 529 chapters. We cover everything from why data governance exists and how a governance operating model is built, through policies and standards, metadata and catalogs, data quality, master data, architecture, privacy and compliance, lineage, data products, tooling, integration, adoption, cloud and data mesh, metrics, and responsible AI, all the way to implementation, case studies, certification, and a functional data quality masterclass. It's the whole shebang. But today we are zeroing in on Module 1, Chapter 9, Stakeholder Mapping and Sponsorship Strategies. If you don't master this foundational piece, the rest of those 21 modules will literally never get off the ground. That brings us to Section 2, Accountability Without Authority. Here is the mindset you need to adopt from day one. Getting governance adopted? It's exactly like passing a bill. You can't just issue a dictatorial order and expect everyone to comply. There's no way. Just like passing a bill in government, you need a powerful sponsor to champion it, you need allies who care deeply, and you have to strategically neutralize your opponents. At its core, politics is just stakeholder management, and honestly, so is data governance. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, Mapping Influence and Interest. We define a stakeholder as anyone who affects or is affected by your governance program. But we're not just going to make a simple list. We map them on two totally crucial axes. The first is influence, which is their sheer power to help or block your program. The second is interest, which simply means how much they actually care about the outcome. Knowing exactly where people fall on these two axes tells you who to manage closely, who to keep satisfied, and who to just keep informed. When you plot these out, it's like a giant puzzle coming together. A clear strategy emerges. You quickly realize that you shouldn't spend equal time on everyone. Instead, you've got to spend your finite political capital in that high-influence, high-interest sweet spot. You focus closely on managing key players, like your board, your CDO, and business heads, with absolute precision. And this translates into a highly practical matrix. For high-influence leaders like your chief data officer, you're going to partner closely and co-own the delivery. For risk and compliance folks, who are natural allies, by the way, you enlist them early. And your everyday data consumers, you keep them informed, enable them, and slowly build them into vocal advocates for your program. Moving on to Section 4, the executive sponsor. An executive sponsor is a senior leader who champions your program, unblocks it when it inevitably gets stuck, and most critically, lends it the authority to act across teams. Remember that big dilemma from earlier, accountability without authority? Well, the executive sponsor is the ultimate cure for that problem. They supply the exact authority that your governance program natively lacks. So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway, and I want you to burn this into your memory. No sponsor, no program. A data governance program without a committed executive sponsor is going to stall out the very first time a powerful team says no. Securing the sponsor isn't just a nice-to-have, it's literally the first real deliverable of your entire program, way before you draft a single policy or buy a fancy data catalog. All right, Section 5, Converting Governance Resistors. So why do people push back? Simple. They fear extra work and lost control. To convert those fence-sitters, you never ever sell data governance for its own sake, because honestly, nobody cares about that. You sell the outcome. You show them what they gain. Less firefighting on the weekends, cleaner reporting, way fewer terrifying audit surprises. Frame your program as a way to reduce their extra work. Once those fence-sitters see their peers actually benefiting, they'll jump on board for sure. Finally, Section 6, Global Nuances and Interview Prep. It's super important to note that sponsorship and stakeholder dynamics actually change depending on where you are in the world. In the EU, for example, the data protection officer and risk teams are your central allies because of heavy GDPR and DORA accountability. In the US, it's much more value-driven. You'll often find business line leaders acting as sponsors, with legal heavily involved to manage litigation risks. And in India, we're seeing growing board attention tied to the DPDP Act, making IT leaders incredibly influential. Your geography literally dictates your stakeholder map. Okay, let's test these new skills with a scenario straight out of a real interview for a large asset manager role. The interviewer asks you, a powerful business head resists governance as extra work. How do you convert them? Here is your 90-second knockout answer. You tell them that you sell the outcome they care about, not governance for its own sake. You show them what they gain: less firefighting, faster reporting, and trustworthy data. Since resistance comes from a fear of extra work, you frame governance as a tool to reduce it. Getting an early win with a willing owner creates pull. Boom. You just proved you understand the core what's in it for me principle. Let's do one more quick one, an entry-level closer question you might face at any large enterprise. In one sentence, why is governance a stakeholder management job? The perfect answer ties our entire narrative together.
You say, because governance is delivered through people who do not report to you, so success depends on mapping stakeholders by influence and interest, securing a senior sponsor for authority, and converting resistors by selling benefits, much like passing a bill. If you can articulate that, you are miles ahead of the competition. To quickly recap what we've covered today, always map your stakeholders based on influence and interest. Recognize that your executive sponsor is your first true deliverable because they provide the authority you desperately need. Match your engagement to each specific group, and when you face resistance, don't argue about governance, sell the outcomes they actually care about.
So you've secured your sponsor and mapped your political landscape. But how do you prove to that powerful sponsor that your program is actually working? That is exactly what we are going to tackle next time in Module 1, Chapter 10, Governance Metrics and KPIs. Because having authority is awesome, but without hard data to prove their success, how long do you really think that sponsor is going to stick around? Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this explainer. I'm your host, and as a battle-tested enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics, I've spent decades in the trenches designing and running governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. We're talking standing up operating models, metadata, data quality capabilities, privacy controls, and modern data platforms. And honestly, my absolute favorite thing in the world is teaching ambitious professionals like you all, data owners, stewards, architects, engineers, privacy officers, and executives, how to do exactly the same thing. Today, we're tackling a topic that literally makes or breaks careers, governance metrics and KPIs. We're going to learn exactly how to measure real success and completely avoid those vanity metrics that impress absolutely nobody in the boardroom. But before we zoom in too closely, let's just take a second to remember the massive scope of our enterprise data governance journey. We're talking about 21 modules and over 500 chapters. It's a sequenced path. We go from foundations, governance roles, data strategy, and metadata management, right through data quality, master data, architecture, privacy, lineage, data products, tooling, data contracts, and integration. Then we push into change management, cloud and data mesh, metrics, responsible AI, rollout, case studies, templates, and finally, a functional data quality masterclass. It's the whole shebang. Okay, so let's dive into exactly where we are on this journey today. We're currently putting a bow on our foundational knowledge in Module 01, specifically tackling Chapter 10 Governance, Metrics, and KPIs. This is all about how you actually prove your program works. Now, it usually takes about 28 minutes to read through the Durga Analytics course material for this chapter. But in this explainer, we're going to distill it down to the absolute most critical, job-ready insights you need to build that executive scorecard and defend your program.
So here's our mentor's blueprint for today. We'll start with the data governance journey, then look at meaningful versus vanity metrics, explore the 4 levels of metrics, figure out how to be building the executive scorecard, dive into regional metrics that matter, and finally, we'll talk about passing the sponsor test.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the data governance journey.
I really want you to let this quote sink in. A program you cannot measure is a program you cannot defend at budget time. Seriously, it's that simple. Before we start building out our metrics, we have to look back at our journey. Remember way back in Chapter 2 when we defined our success criteria? We figured out what winning actually looks like for the business? Well, KPIs are simply how you measure those exact success criteria month to month. Listen, a KPI without a direct link back to your Chapter 2 success criteria, that is essentially scope creep in measurement form. They have to be connected. I have seen brilliant, highly capable data governance leads, people who understand architecture and metadata inside and out, get their programs slashed to 0. Why? Because they walked into a budget meeting and couldn't point to hard, measurable business outcomes. If you want funding, you need evidence. Moving right along to Section 2, meaningful versus vanity metrics. Okay, so by definition, a key performance indicator, or KPI, is a measure that tells you whether your program is actually achieving a business outcome.
A good KPI has to be tied to a business result, it must be really hard to game, and it should only move when the program actually works. On the flip side, you've got vanity metrics. Take something like number of policies written. That number goes up whether or not your data quality actually improves at all. It's just an illusion of progress.
I love thinking about this through a fitness tracking analogy. If you count how many times you swipe your key fob at the gym, that's a vanity metric. I mean, you could just be sitting at the juice bar playing on your phone. Your resting heart rate, your actual physical strength, those are your true outcome metrics. In our corporate world, a governance KPI should act exactly like your health markers. Counting policies written or meetings held is just counting gym visits. Measuring the percentage of critical data with a named owner, now that is an outcome metric. It tells you if the enterprise is actually getting healthier. And that perfectly sets up Section 3, the 4 levels of metrics. Walk with me through this progression because not all metrics are created equal. At the bottom, the absolute weakest, we have activity or output metrics. These just count effort, like policies written or assets cataloged. They're super easy to track, but incredibly weak because they can skyrocket while absolutely nothing improves in the business. Next up, we have control effectiveness metrics. These show if your controls actually work, like the share of critical data with passing controls. Moving up, getting stronger, we have data outcome metrics. This is where you see the data itself improving. Think quality scores on critical data sets or the volume of data issues actually closed. Finally, at the very top, the absolute strongest, are business value metrics. These show governance moving a real, tangible business result, like faster trusted reporting, reduced risk exposure, or cold hard ROI. I'm going to warn you right now. Use activity metrics very sparingly and never, ever make them the headline to your board. So let's see how this builds into real-world reporting. These right here are the core governance KPIs executives actually want to track. Look at these. You see 85% for owned critical data. You see 78% for the data quality score. You see open audit findings sitting at 12%. Time to data, which, remember, is how long it takes an analyst to actually find and trust a data set, sitting at 40 days, and policy compliance at 72. These are solid outcome metrics. A scorecard with 5 outcome KPIs like these will beat a scorecard with 30 activity counts every single time. Seriously, cut every metric that wouldn't change an executive's decision. Okay, let's take those numbers and talk about Section 4. Building the executive scorecard. This executive scorecard right here, this is your golden ticket. It is built entirely on the golden triad of executive reporting: target, current, and trend. We have our KPI listed on the left, then the target we're aiming for, then the current state, and finally, the trend direction. For instance, our data quality score target is 85%. Currently, we're at 78%, but the trend is up. You can literally fit your entire program's health on one single page. This is exactly how fewer, better outcome KPIs cut through all the corporate noise. Now, listen closely. The crucial point here, and if you take nothing else away from this explainer, please let it be this: the trend matters most. A single number by itself can completely mislead a sponsor. A data quality score of 80% sounds totally fine, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It sounds terrible if you learn it was 90% last quarter and is falling fast. On the flip side, 80% is incredibly reassuring if you know it was 60% last quarter and is climbing steadily. The target sets the bar. The current value shows where you are today, but the trend proves whether your program is actually working. Show the direction, always. Let's pivot slightly for Section 5, regional metrics that matter. So if you're operating a global data governance program, your scorecard absolutely has to adapt to your specific geography. It's like speaking different regional dialects. If you're reporting to an executive committee in the European Union, they are laser-focused on risk and audit KPIs. They want to see open audit findings and DSAR or consent metrics for GDPR. Evidence of enforcement is basically a KPI in itself over there. Now, shift across the pond to the United States.
Here, value and risk KPIs take center stage. Time to data and analytics enablement carry massive weight. They want to track litigation exposure reduction. And hey, if you're in banking, you better have model data quality KPIs for SR 11.7 ready to go. Over in India, we're looking heavily at readiness KPIs. DBP readiness and consent metrics are rising rapidly, and localization compliance is heavily tracked. You have to speak the regulatory language of the region you are presenting to.
All right, we've made it to the final stretch, Section 6, passing the sponsor test. I want you to treat this question as the ultimate sponsor test. It's like the mini villain of the boardroom. Picture this. You present a beautifully formatted, colorful report saying, "We trained 500 people and bought a fancy new cataloging tool." And the executive sponsor just looks at you, deadpan, and asks, "And did risk go down?" If your metrics are just vanity fluff, your entire presentation collapses right there on the spot. Every single KPI on your scorecard must be armed and ready to survive that exact question. So let's do some rapid-fire scenario prep. If you're interviewing for a lead role at a global investment bank and they ask what goes on the board's scorecard, you confidently answer a small set of outcome KPIs, ownership coverage, data quality scores, open audit findings. If a regulated retail bank asks why you avoid vanity metrics, you tell them straight up it's because they pad reports but fail the did risk go down test. At a large asset manager, when they ask why trends matter, you explain that a single number misleads, but target, current, and trend tell the complete, honest story. And finally, always tie it back to the start. KPIs are simply the running measurement of the promises you made in your foundational charter's success criteria. Master these concepts, and you'll defend your program with total authority anywhere you go.
So you now know exactly how to measure real success and dodge the vanity trap. But let me ask you this. If your CEO demanded a dollar value ROI for your governance program tomorrow morning, could you prove it? Well, next up is Chapter 11, Building the Business Case in ROI, where the metrics we just built become actual money. Thank you so much for diving deep with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Welcome to this explainer from Durga Analytics. I've spent decades designing data governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management. And today, we're going to master the mechanics of building a highly credible business case for your CFO. If you're an aspiring or working data governance lead, steward, architect, engineer, or privacy officer, this is exactly where the rubber meets the road. We're going to learn how to translate data controls into a language that actually secures funding.
Before we dive right into the deep end, let's do a really quick reminder of the massive 21-module enterprise data governance journey we're taking together in this course.
Modules 1 through 7 establish our absolute foundations. We're talking everything from why governance even exists and operating models, all the way to metadata, data architecture, and quality standards.
Then, in modules 8 through 14, we really get into the operational weeds. This is where we tackle privacy controls, the tooling ecosystem, data products, and the always tricky cultural change management. And finally, modules 15 through 21 scale us up into cloud architectures, responsible AI ethics, and hands-on certification playbooks. Every single step is grounded in vendor-neutral, regulated finance reality. All right, let's zoom in on today's session. Module 01, Chapter 11, Building the Business Case and ROI for Data Governance. This is where we discover how metrics literally become money. It's all about answering 3 massive questions for your executive team. What will we spend? What will we get back? And when? You know, the absolute most effective way to explain a governance business case to executives is to frame it as part insurance policy and part engine tune-up. The defensive side, that's your insurance. You pay a premium to avoid a massive, albeit uncertain loss, like a staggering GDPR fine. But the offensive side, that's the tune-up. You pay for it, and suddenly your engine runs better every single day. We're talking faster reporting and cleaner analytics. Trust me, a smart CFO buys into both. Okay,
Let's move into defining real ROI sources and break down exactly where the cash actually comes from.
What's really fascinating here is that a massive 30% of your ROI comes strictly from what we call rework avoided. Just look at how it completely dominates. This is the time your highly paid staff currently wastes manually reconciling broken data. It's your most credible ROI line because, well, it's happening right now, every single day. It's followed by faster reporting at 22% and fines avoided at 20%. But rework avoidance, that will always be your anchor.
So you absolutely must rigorously separate these into 3 distinct buckets for finance. First, you've got hard benefits. Things like days saved per reporting cycle. You literally just multiply staff hours by their cost. Easy. Then we have risk-adjusted benefits, like avoided regulatory fines. Look, never, and I mean never, present a $50 million fine as guaranteed cash in the bank. Doing that destroys your credibility instantly. Present it as a probability-weighted risk reduction. And finally, soft benefits, things like better decision-making. They are totally real, but you don't bank them. They just add some illustrative color to your case.
Moving on to the governance payback curve. Because knowing your benefits is only half the battle. Your CFO wants to know when this program will actually start making money.
A single ROI percentage? It isn't nearly as persuasive as presenting a solid payback curve. This visually proves to your CFO that you actually live in reality. It shows you understand that governance costs money. You know, hiring, tooling, change management, long before it actually yields any returns.
And this just brilliantly illustrates that exact reality. See how you start in the negative during Q1 and Q2? That's totally normal. But as adoption grows, rework falls, and reporting speeds up, notice how that cumulative value confidently crosses over into the positive right around Q3. Showing this honest, realistic journey builds immense trust with finance leaders.
Let's transition to regional ROI framing strategies, because a credible business case has to speak the local language.
You have to adapt your ROI framing to regional regulatory realities. What works in London simply won't fly in Mumbai. For instance, the EU leans heavily on risk-weighted compliance. Think GDPR or DORA. The US, on the other hand, balances litigation cost avoidance with a really aggressive push for analytics speed to market. Meanwhile, over in India, the conversation focuses heavily on growth, efficiency, and readiness for the DPDP Act. The big takeaway here? Always tailor your pitch to the specific boardroom you are standing in. Now let's get into defending your ROI numbers. Let's drill into a scenario-based interview question you might actually face from a skeptical executive.
Picture this. You're sitting across from the CFO at a regulated retail bank, and they ask you, why lead with rework avoided instead of fines avoided? Look, it's super tempting for a novice to walk in and say, hey, fund my program, or we're going to face a $100 million fine. But the CFO knows that fine isn't a guarantee. They're testing you.
So your rock-solid answer must be that honesty beats inflation. Presenting uncertain fine avoidance as banked cash just destroys trust. Rework, however, that is a daily bleed of resources. If 10 of your analysts spend 20 hours a week manually fixing spreadsheets, you can put a hard, undeniable dollar amount on that today.
Ultimately, you win funding by presenting hard benefits you can measure today, treating risks honestly as a probability, and letting those soft benefits simply add color. A credible, smaller number based on reality beats an inflated, incredible large number based on promises every single time. That, my friends, is how you get your program fully funded. So, ask yourself this. If you had to present your data governance business case to your CFO tomorrow morning, are you selling a phantom $100 million fine, or are you selling the actual hours your team is bleeding right now? Think about that. Now that you've secured the funding, the real work begins. Get ready for Chapter 12, where we are going to uncover common governance pitfalls and failure modes so you can avoid the traps that sink programs. See you there!
Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm your host, an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. Over the last couple of decades, I've designed and run data governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. We're talking standing up operating models, metadata capabilities, privacy controls, and modern data platforms from the ground up. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to share some incredibly practical lessons with all of you, whether you're an aspiring data governance lead, a steward, an architect, or a privacy pro. We're going to dig into the completely predictable reasons why governance programs fail. Why? So you can turn other people's very expensive mistakes into your cheap lessons. Just as a quick reminder of where we are in our massive course layout, this journey spans 21 modules and 529 chapters. We cover everything from the foundations, through roles and operating models, data quality, all the way to cloud governance, responsible AI, and a functional data quality masterclass. It is all grounded in vendor-neutral practice with a heavy regulated finance overlay. Right now, we are wrapping up our foundations in Module 01, specifically tackling Chapter 12, Common Governance Pitfalls and Failure Modes.
So, here is the million-dollar question we really need to ask ourselves today. Why do most expensive data governance programs just stall at the starting line? If you're a working professional in the space, you might literally be facing this exact struggle right now. You get the budget approved, you build out a team, maybe you even buy some shiny new software, and yet absolutely nothing changes. Why does that actually happen? Well, let's dive in. We've got a tight playbook today. We're covering 1. Top failure modes, 2. Early warnings and antidotes, 3. The tool-first trap, and 4. Global failure patterns. Starting right off with Section 1, Top Failure Modes. A failure mode is basically just a recognizable, reoccurring way that a program goes off the rails. And honestly, governance has a surprisingly short, predictable list of them. To understand why they completely sink a program, think about it like building a house. Building a governance program without an executive sponsor is just like building a house without a permit. Eventually, someone is going to show up and stop you. Skipping enforcement? Well, that means you've got a beautiful blueprint that absolutely nobody follows. I literally cannot stress this enough. Each failure is a foundational error that no later effort can fully fix.
When we look at the actual data behind these failures, two massive traps instantly jump to the top of the frequency list. The absolute biggest one, having no executive sponsor. Without a sponsor, the program has zero real authority. It just stalls at the very first sign of resistance from the business. The second massive failure is having no business value link. This happens when you're just doing governance for governance's sake, which, let me tell you, is the absolute fastest way to lose your funding. We also constantly see issues with no enforcement, meaning policies are written but there are no controls, and programs surviving on vanity metrics only, where you're measuring how busy you are instead of actual business outcomes.
Now, you've probably heard the phrase boiling the ocean, right? This is another highly common failure, especially in brand new programs. It's a classic maturity stage trap. Boiling the ocean means you are attempting to govern all data across every single domain, all at exactly the same time. It's this massive form of scope creep that spreads a program way too thin to deliver anything useful. Going back to our house analogy, it's like trying to build the kitchen, the bedrooms, and the roof all at once and finishing absolutely none of them. You simply burn through your resources and kill your own momentum.
Moving on to Section 2, Early Warnings and Antidotes. Okay, we've identified the foundational errors, so let's shift gears and talk about the cure. This is your ultimate practitioner's playbook. Every failure throws off an early warning sign. It's like a check engine light on your dashboard. For instance, how do you know you have a sponsor problem? Well, nobody senior shows up to your steering meetings. The antidote there, you stop everything and secure a committed sponsor first. How do you know you're boiling the ocean? Every domain is marked in scope right out of the gate. The antidote is to prioritize ruthlessly and grow in increments. And here's a really common one. If your monthly reports just say things like, "We held 3 meetings," or "We defined 10 data terms," you are definitely suffering from vanity metrics.
The antidote is to track actual outcomes tied directly to business value.
Let's look at Section 3, the tool-first trap. I want to unpack what is arguably the single most expensive mistake modern data programs make today. Imagine you're in a scenario-based job interview for a massive, regulated retail bank. The interviewer leans in and asks, "Why is buying a governance tool first such a common and costly mistake?" Take a second to really think about how you'd answer that. Because out in the real world, firms constantly buy tools, hoping the tool itself is the governance.
And here is exactly how you should answer that question. A tool accelerates a working operating model. It absolutely cannot replace one. If you go out and buy an expensive data catalog, but you haven't assigned any stewards to curate it, you just bought an empty shelf. If you buy an MDM tool but haven't defined your data owners, it instantly turns into shelfware. Shelfware is exactly what it sounds like. Software bought but never effectively used because the people and processes to actually run it just weren't there.
So how do we avoid creating expensive shelfware? You have to follow what I like to call the order that works. You really need to burn these steps into your memory. Step 1, secure a sponsor for authority. Step 2, define your scope and priorities so you don't boil the ocean. Step 3, establish the operating model and roles so accountability is crystal clear. Step 4, define the process, which is your life cycle from policy right through to enforcement. And then, only then, Step 5, the tool. The tool always comes absolutely last. You only bring it in once there are people to use it and a real process for it to support. Reversing this order is pretty much a guaranteed path to failure.
Finally, let's touch on Section 4, Global Failure Patterns. What's genuinely fascinating is how these universal failures manifest totally differently depending on which region of the world you're operating in. Local context and specific regulations expose entirely different weaknesses. For example, in the European Union, no enforcement failures show up incredibly fast as very painful audit findings under stringent regulations like GDPR or DARA. The regulators there will immediately call you out on policy-only governance. Over at the United States, programs without a strong, provable business value link lose their funding almost overnight, and litigation often exposes unenforced policies. Plus, that tool-first buying mistake, incredibly common and costly in the US. Meanwhile, in India, we tend to see a lot of maturity stage traps. Boiling the ocean is super common in new programs, executive sponsor practice is still maturing, and tool-first buying is rising heavily due to a huge vendor push.
So the big takeaway from this explainer is simple but brutal. Foundational errors, whether it's skipping the sponsor, boiling the ocean, or buying a shiny tool before you have an operating model, cannot be fixed later. They become permanent cracks in your foundation. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Are you ready to take an honest look at your own program's maturity and spot these warning signs before it's too late? I certainly hope so. Up next is Chapter 13, Governance Maturity Models, where we'll turn these exact lessons into a formal assessment and roadmap. I'll see you there.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome back, everyone, to our ongoing explainer series on enterprise data governance. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Look, if you've been following along, you probably know by now that I'm an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. I've spent decades in the trenches, designing and running governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. We're talking everything from standing up operating models and metadata capabilities to modern data platforms and regulatory controls. And today, we are anchoring ourselves precisely in Module 1, Chapter 13, Governance Maturity Models, Assessment and Roadmaps. We're finally taking that theoretical maturity curve we introduced way back in Chapter 1, and we're turning it into a sharp, practical, real-world working tool. Just to ground us before we get into the weeds, let's do a quick reminder of the overall course structure. The course name is Enterprise Data Governance, and it is a massive sequence journey across 21 modules and 529 chapters. We cover the whole shebang, from the basic foundations of why data governance exists, through operating models, metadata and catalogs, data quality, master data, architecture, privacy, data products, cloud and data mesh, all the way to responsible AI implementation and a functional data quality masterclass. It's designed specifically for aspiring and working data governance leads, data owners, stewards, architects, engineers, and privacy officers. Every single module is grounded in vendor-neutral practice, complete with a regulated finance overlay and job-ready governance artifacts. Right now, we're wrapping up Module 1, getting you fully equipped to honestly assess where your firm stands today before you start building. So, here is our agenda for Chapter 13. 1. Our welcome and intro. 2. The 5 maturity levels. 3. The honest assessment. 4. Setting realistic targets. 5. Building the roadmap. And 6. Regional targets and next steps. All right, moving right into Part 2, the 5 maturity levels. To visualize this climb, we use a classic 5-level teaching scale. Level 1 is initial. This means things are ad hoc, chaotic, and there's absolutely no real ownership. Level 2 is developing, where a few roles and policies are just starting to emerge. Level 3 is defined, meaning your policies, roles, and standards are officially documented. Level 4 is managed, where those standards are actively measured, monitored, and enforced. And finally, Level 5 is optimized, where your processes are automated and continuously improving. Now, keep in mind, this is a pedagogical learning aid. When you do real enterprise assessments, these map loosely to established industry frameworks like Dama Diambach or the EDM Council's DCAM model, which we'll actually dive into later in Module 2. You can think of this whole concept just like learning how to drive a car. You can't skip your very first lesson and jump straight into high-speed defensive driving, right? Initial is literally having never sat behind the wheel. Developing is taking those early lessons with an instructor. Defined is finally passing your driving test. Managed is your confident, safe daily commute. And optimized, that's advanced, near automatic expert skill. Governance works the exact same way. You have to climb it step by step because each level is fundamentally built on the foundation of the one right before it. Which brings us to Part 3, the honest assessment. So, a maturity assessment scores your firm against each of those levels across different dimensions. Things like roles, policies, quality, and metadata. But here is the absolute crucial takeaway. You have to be brutally honest. You must score what is actually true today, not what executive leadership desperately hopes is true. I literally cannot stress this enough. If a firm rates itself as managed when it's truly just at the developing stage, they are building a roadmap on a complete fantasy. If you overstate your maturity, you are guaranteeing an unrealistic plan that will absolutely fail. You have to look for hard evidence. Do the controls actually operate in practice? Do real, accountable owners actually exist? When you break this down dimension by dimension, it becomes a highly actionable plan. You assess specific areas completely independently of one another. For example, your firm's ownership dimension might honestly be at the developing stage, while data quality and enforcement might still be stuck at initial. By breaking it down granularly like this, practitioners can set precise, achievable 12-month targets for each specific area. That's 1,000,000 times better than relying on massive, vague guesswork for the entire company all at once. Let's look closer at that in Part 4, Setting Realistic Targets.
If you remember nothing else today, remember this central maxim. Maturity is climbed, not jumped. You must target exactly one level up per dimension in a single planning cycle. If your firm is currently at developing, your target is defined. It is not managed. Overreaching on maturity is basically the data governance equivalent of trying to boil the ocean. You absolutely have to prove progress at one level before you can credibly plan for the next.
Let's put this into perspective with a real-world scenario. Imagine you're interviewing for a leadership role at a large asset manager. A senior executive looks you in the eye and says they want to reach the top maturity level, optimized, within 12 months, starting from a baseline of practically zero. How do you respond to that? Well, you tell them the truth. Targeting optimize from an initial state in just 1 year is neither ambitious nor credible. It's a trap, and it will fail just like any other overscoped plan. Delivering defined this year and managed next year builds infinitely more credibility than making an impossible promise you can't keep.
This perfectly sets up part 5, building the roadmap. So, what exactly do we mean when we say roadmap in the context of enterprise data governance? It's a sequenced plan of concrete, owned, time-bound moves that raise each governance dimension one level at a time. It cannot be some vague corporate slide deck. Every single move on this roadmap has to tie directly back to the specific success criteria and KPIs that we discussed in earlier chapters.
Let me give you some highly specific, actionable examples of what these moves actually look like on the ground. Say you're a governance practitioner trying to prove tangible progress. You need measurable evidence. Step 1. To move your ownership dimension from developing to defined, your concrete move is to formally appoint domain owners. That's it. Step 2. To move your enforcement dimension from initial to developing, you write and enforce your very first data quality control. Every move must be specific, measurable, and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are actively advancing up that maturity scale.
Finally, let's talk about part 6, regional targets and next steps. You have to realize that geography heavily dictates your maturity strategy. Over in the European Union, a managed state is practically required by law. Regulations like BCBS 239 and DORA effectively demand managed level enforcement, while GDPR requires highly mature personal data dimensions just for basic auditability. Over in the United States, targets tend to be much more value-led, tracking alongside a company's analytics ambition. Though regulations like SRQ7 for models, along with heavy litigation risks, definitely push those enforcement targets higher. Meanwhile, in India, many firms are aggressively targeting a fast, defined milestone, largely driven by local DPDP privacy laws and strict data localization requirements. The takeaway? You must adapt your target maturity to the specific region you operate in.
As we wrap up Chapter 13, I want to leave you with a rather provocative question to ask yourself about your own enterprise. If you honestly assessed your firm's real maturity today, peeling back all those hopeful green executive dashboards, would your current roadmap actually survive the truth? Let that sink in for a second. It's a tough question, for sure, but answering it honestly is quite literally the only way you're going to succeed. Join me next time for Chapter 14, where we're going to take this exact roadmap and turn it into a rock-solid program plan, complete with phases, timelines, and resources. I can't wait to see you there.
Welcome to This Explainer. I'm your host and resident enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. Over the last few decades, I've had the absolute privilege of designing and running data governance programs across heavily regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. I've stood up governance operating models, metadata and data quality capabilities, privacy controls, and modern data platforms, all while teaching data owners, stewards, architects, and executives to do the exact same. Today, we're putting on our enterprise data governance expert hats to map out a highly practical, realistic, and most importantly, fundable program plan. As a quick reminder, this explainer is part of our massive course, Enterprise Data Governance. It is a sequenced journey across 21 modules and 529 chapters. We literally cover the whole shebang, starting with the foundations of enterprise data governance in Module 1 and moving through governance roles, data strategy, metadata management, data quality, master data, architecture, privacy, lineage, data products, tooling, contracts, integration, change management, cloud and data mesh, metrics, responsible AI, implementation, case studies, templates, all the way to a functional data quality masterclass in Module 21.
Every single module is grounded in vendor-neutral practice with a regulated finance overlay. Today, we're zooming squarely into Module 1, specifically Chapter 14, Program Planning, Phases, Timelines, and Resource Models.
In our previous chapters, we figured out the destination with our roadmap. But here's the thing. A roadmap just says where to go. A program plan says how, when, and with whom we're actually going to get there. Today is all about learning how to survive corporate budget cycles. We're turning a theoretical roadmap into a step-by-step execution plan that completely avoids the classic pitfall of trying to boil the ocean. Here's a quick look at our agenda for today's session. We'll cover where we are today, 2, phasing, the railway analogy, 3, setting realistic timelines, 4, the lean resource model, 5, regional governance realities, and finally, 6, preparing for cultural change. Consider this your blueprint to execute a self-funding governance journey. Let's dive right into Section 1, where we are today. If you're an aspiring data governance lead, a data architect, or a data product manager, this is where theory crashes into your daily reality. Let's define it clearly. A program plan breaks your governance program into phases, timelines, milestones, and resources to actually deliver that roadmap. Think of it as your professional survival mechanism. It ensures you deliver coherent, bite-sized increments rather than trying to swallow the whole enterprise at once, which, trust me, after years in complex banking and energy environments, is a guaranteed recipe for failure. Moving right along to Section 2, phasing, and my absolute favorite concept, the railway analogy. Executives do not want to fund a massive, endless black hole of governance. They want to fund business value. So think of your governance program exactly like building a transcontinental railway. You absolutely don't try to lay all the tracks at once. First you survey, then you lay one profitable line, say connecting a coal mine to a steel mill. You run it, you build trust, and you use that revenue to extend the network. A data governance program runs the exact same way. This completely shifts the narrative, brilliantly illustrating how your capability accumulates across 4 distinct phases: mobilize, foundations, scale, and optimize. Each phase is a coherent deliverable, not just a thin slice of an all-at-once effort. Remember, that first profitable line earns the revenue and the trust that funds the rest of the build. Let's break those phases down into actionable steps. Step 1 is Phase 0, mobilize, which just takes a few weeks to systematically secure your sponsor and core team. Step 2 is Phase 1, foundations, taking a few months to govern your first high-value data domain and prove real value. Step 3 is Phase 2, scale, which takes several quarters to extend to multiple domains and introduce enterprise tooling. Finally, Step 4 is Phase 3, optimize, which is an ongoing, continuous effort focused heavily on automation. All right, Section 3, setting realistic timelines. Now that we have our phases, let's tackle the timeline itself, so we don't make the fatal mistake of overpromising. Whether you are a privacy officer or a risk manager, timelines are where trust is either forged or completely broken. Let's walk through this matrix row by row. Phase 0 takes 4 to 8 weeks to agree on scope. Phase 1 takes 3 to 6 months to get that first domain governed. Phase 2 scales out over 6 to 12 months, and Phase 3 is ongoing. Notice how the unit of measurement scales up? We go from weeks to months to quarters to ongoing. This sets the right expectations right out of the gate. So, here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. If leadership at your firm wants everything done in 6 months, do not pad the plan. Do not say yes just to please them. Commit to a concrete Phase 1 win in that window, like getting one critical domain fully governed, and phase out the rest. Padding a plan to look fast up front will completely destroy trust when it inevitably slips. Always underpromise on timing and deliver. Next up, Section 4, the lean resource model. Setting the timeline is only half the battle. Next, we need a resource model that executives will actually greenlight. You could have a great timeline, but if your headcount request is absurd, you're dead in the water. Here's a hard-learned lesson from the trenches. Do not build a massive, bloated, centralized governance department. It's a costly error. The right way is a lean center with a distributed edge. A few specialists in the center, supported by embedded data owners and stewards out in the business.
A resource model is simply the sizing of that governance team. This lean core plus embedded stewards approach perfectly aligns with the hybrid operating model we've discussed before. It scales efficiently right where the data actually lives and where the business context is understood, whether that's right on a trading floor or out at a retail branch.
Moving to Section 5, Regional Governance Realities. Now, what's really fascinating is how your beautiful plan has to adapt to global physical realities. A plan in Frankfurt looks very different from one in New York or Mumbai. Depending on your region, your early phases are shaped by very different forces. In the EU, it's highly deadline-driven by regulations like GDPR or DORA. In the US, it's typically value-driven around M&A activities or analytics. And in India, it might be anchored heavily around readiness phases for DPDP data localization. You have to tailor your phase 1 to solve your region's biggest immediate headache. Finally, Section 6, Preparing for Cultural Change. Let's wrap up this strategy so you can get out there and execute. Above all else, remember to structure your program as a self-funding sequence. Ordering your work so an early, visible, quick win on a high-value domain produces evidence is exactly what justifies funding for the later phases. It's that first profitable railway line. This keeps you from being seen as a perpetual cost center struggling to survive its very first budget review. We've successfully built the perfect plan on paper. We have the phases, the timelines, the lean resources, and the self-funding sequence. But I want to leave you with this provocative thought as a leader in your organization. You have the perfect plan, but will the humans in your enterprise actually adopt it? Because at the end of the day, a plan only works if people actually change how they work. Without human adoption, even the best spreadsheets and roadmaps are totally useless. That's why our next stop on this journey is Chapter 15, Change Management for Governance Adoption. I'll see you there. Welcome back, data professionals. I am so excited to be your instructor for today's explainer. Now, drawing on my decades of experience designing and running data governance programs here at Durga Analytics, working across regulated banking, energy trading, and complex asset management enterprises, I can tell you firsthand, you could literally build the most beautiful, state-of-the-art data platforms in the world. But if the business doesn't actually adopt them, well, your program is going to fail, period. So whether you're an aspiring data governance lead, a data architect, a privacy officer, or a data engineer, your ultimate success relies entirely on people. That's why today we're tackling the absolutely vital human side of our work, change management for governance adoption. Here is a super quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll anchor ourselves in the overarching governance journey, define the behavior change problem, and explore 5 powerful change levers. Then we'll cover sustaining adoption, adapting across global regions, and we'll wrap the whole thing up with some hands-on interview practice. Let's jump right in. Section 1, the governance journey. Just to ground us in where we are, remember that this enterprise data governance course is a massive, sequenced journey spanning 21 modules and 529 chapters. Right now, we are sitting solidly in Module 14, Change Management, Adoption, and Cultural Transformation. And our specific focus today is Chapter 326. Now, we've spent the previous modules building out complex operating models, metadata catalogs, and rigorous data quality standards. But here's the reality check. All of that brilliant architecture is completely useless if people don't use it. Change management is how we drive actual boots-on-the-ground behavior. Because without it, even the most heavily sponsored plan is just going to stall out. Moving on to Section 2, the behavior change problem.
Let this quote really sink in. A perfect plan fails if people do not change how they work. Listen, governance is a behavior change program just as much as it is a technical one. Think about what we're actually asking incredibly busy people to do. We're asking them to take time out of their already packed days to formally name data owners, follow strict new standards, and go back to fix broken data, which is work they likely never had to do before. If you treat governance purely as a technical IT rollout and you ignore this human element, your adoption will fail, for sure, no matter how expensive or shiny your new catalog tool happens to be. To really wrap our heads around this concept, let's look at a real-world analogy. I want you to ask yourself, how did we actually get people to start wearing seatbelts? This brilliantly illustrates our challenge. Passing a strict seatbelt law didn't just magically make everyone buckle up overnight, right? The rule alone changed very little. To actually shift the behavior of millions of people, it took education, highly visible enforcement, social pressure, and eventually designing a literal click that just felt automatic when you sat in the car. Governance adoption is exactly like a seatbelt campaign. Writing a great data policy and just posting a PDF on your company intranet does absolutely nothing on its own. Behavior changes through modeling, through habit, and by making the right thing the easy thing.
All right, section 3, 5 powerful change levers. First, let's just make sure we have our vocabulary dialed in. In our enterprise context, change management is defined as the discipline of helping people adopt new ways of working. It supplies the actual mechanisms, or the levers, that pull an organization from actively resisting your governance program to actually living and breathing it day to day. Okay, let's look at the hard data behind these levers. Check out the top drivers for adoption here. Sitting at 80%, we have quick wins shown, and that's because visible, early success builds genuine belief in the program. Moving up to 85%, we have executive modeling, because when senior leaders visibly follow the governance rules themselves, you better believe their teams do too. But towering over everything else at a massive 90% is embedded in workflow. This is, without a doubt, the absolute strongest lever we have in our toolkit. We also utilize training and enablement because, obviously, people can't follow rules they don't actually understand, and aligned incentives to make sure we're rewarding great stewardship rather than just punishing folks with extra unrewarded admin work. I really want to double-click on that 90% lever for a second. Embedding. Embedding simply means building governance directly into existing tools and workflows, so the governed way naturally becomes the easiest path forward. Like I said before, you want to make the right thing the easy thing. If your governance process requires a user to open 3 different tools and fill out some massive 20-page form, yeah, no one is going to do it. But if it's just a simple required drop-down field in a tool they're already using every single day, or maybe a direct link to the data catalog right there in their BI dashboard, well, it instantly becomes the path of least resistance. Section 4, sustaining your adoption. So you launch a program, adoption almost always spikes during that big, exciting launch week, and then it usually fades. To fight this natural drop-off, adoption has to be measured, not just felt. We really need to turn qualitative hope into tracked, hard outcomes. You should be tracking very concrete signals here. Role activation, meaning what share of your named data owners are actually logging into the system. Stewardship participation, are they actively curating their data? Policy and control adoption, how much of your in-scope data is actually sitting under control? Issue closure behavior, when data issues are flagged, are they actually being closed and how fast? And finally, governed data usage. Are your consumers actually pulling governed datasets from the catalog, or are they sneaking around using shadow copies? And to keep those metrics healthy, you absolutely need organizational machinery. In the biz, we call this an operating rhythm. It's the regular, predictable cadence of meetings, communication, and recognition that keeps your governance program alive and kicking. Usually this takes the form of a standing data council. I'll tell you right now, governance that is just launched and then left alone will rapidly drift right back to the old, messy ways of doing things. You need recurring enablement and public recognition of good stewardship to keep this engine running. Section 5. Regional change strategies.
Now, this table synthesizes something super important: how adoption strategies must adapt to regional realities across a global enterprise. Change management is not one size fits all. In the European Union, compliance is a massive, highly legitimate lever. Regulatory obligations and coordinating deeply with works councils will heavily shape your approach there, and training is often a strict compliance requirement. Now, flip over to the United States, and it's heavily driven by value and recognition. You need really strong incentive alignment and visible champions networks to drive adoption stateside. Over in India, leadership modeling is incredibly powerful. Visible executive alignment, combined with strong, tight-knit community building, is the best way to enable rapid growth there. You have to tailor your levers to your specific audience.
All right, Section 6, Scenario Interview Practice. Let's see what you've learned. Okay, I want to put you in the hot seat with some scenario-based interview practice, exactly like you'd face if you were interviewing for a senior role at a major firm today. Imagine you're interviewing at a highly regulated, retail, and risk-driven bank. The interviewer looks right at you and asks, in your experience, what is the most durable way to drive governance adoption? How are you going to answer that? Here is your strong, bulletproof, script-like answer. You look them in the eye and tell them the most durable way is embedding governance into existing workflows, so the right thing is the easy thing. Give them concrete examples, like building a required field or a mandatory approval directly into an existing pipeline process. And you end with this absolutely crucial point. Willpower and enthusiasm fade after launch. A well-designed default does not. Awareness campaigns are great, but embedding is what actually makes adoption stick, when everyone's attention inevitably moves on to the next big thing. Let's try one more scenario. Say you're speaking to a non-technical business stakeholder, or maybe you're interviewing for an entry-level closer role at a large asset management firm. They ask you, listen, this is complex. Can you use an everyday analogy to explain governance adoption to me? Boom, you bring out the seatbelt campaign. You explain to them that passing a law alone didn't make people buckle up. It actually took education, visible enforcement, and eventually designing a physical habit that just felt automatic. Enterprise governance is the exact same thing. The written policy on its own changes very little, but executive modeling, making the governed action the easy default, and building actual habits, well, that is exactly how you turn dry corporate rule into normal, automatic, everyday behavior. So, as we wrap up Chapter 326 of Module 14, I want to leave you with a challenge. Look at your organization right now today. Are you relying on sheer willpower and nagging to govern your data? Or are you actively designing defaults? Where can you embed a well-designed default right now? Think about it. In our next explainer, we'll be jumping into Chapter 327, where we will dive much deeper into the machinery of sustained adoption: communications, training, and community building. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through it. Until then, remember, your job isn't just to write the rules, it's to make the right thing the easy thing. Catch you next time.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I'm your enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. Over the last few decades, I've had the chance to design and run data governance programs across some intensely regulated spaces. We're talking banking, energy trading, asset management, the whole shebang. From standing up operating models and modern data platforms to untangling complex privacy controls, I've seen exactly what works in the real world and, well, what spectacularly fails. So today, we're going to help you build the machinery of change. We're getting into the practical, hands-on steps you absolutely need to turn a data governance launch from a one-off event into a living, self-sustaining practice.
Just to quickly ground us in where we are, let's map out our massive 21-module journey. We start with the absolute basics: Module 01 Foundations, 02 Governance Roles, 03 Data Strategy, 04 Metadata Management, 05 Data Quality, 06 Master Data, 7 Data Architecture, 8 Privacy and Security, 9 Data Catalog and Lineage, 10 Data Product Management, and rounding out the first half, Module 11 Tooling and Technology. Then, the second half of our journey gets even more specialized. We move through Module 12, Data Contracts, 13, data integration, 14, change management, 15, cloud and data mesh, 16, metrics, 17, responsible AI, 18, implementation, 19, case studies, 20, templates and playbooks, before culminating in our highly functional Module 21 Data Quality Masterclass. It's a completely sequenced, comprehensive journey grounded entirely in vendor-neutral practice.
Which brings us right to where we are today. We are now in Module 01, Chapter 16, Communications, Training and Community Building, with a huge spotlight on the Data Council. This right here is where we shift from theory to reality.
Here is our roadmap for this session. We'll cover 1. The governance journey continues. 2. Meet the Data Council. 3. Targeted communication strategies. 4. Building a champions network. 5. Sustaining the community. And finally 6. Regional communication nuances. It's a highly practical, job-ready framework.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, the governance journey continues. Because deploying a framework, that isn't the finish line. Honestly, it's just the starting line. Today, we're building the actual community and communication machinery that prevents your hard work from just fading away.
Moving into Part 2, Meet the Data Council. This is the true operating heartbeat of any successful governance program. It's the place where owners, stewards, and leads actually get in a room and align.
But look, a data council isn't just some recurring meeting you throw on an Outlook calendar. By definition, it's a standing forum, and it absolutely must have 3 mandatory components. First, a clear charter. What is its exact remit and authority? Second, a cadence, meaning a reliable, predictable frequency for how often they meet. And third, deliverables. I'm talking actual decisions, escalations, progress reports. Without all 3 of these, your council is just a talking shop. It's not a real decision-making body. In large enterprises, these bodies have to operate in very distinct layers, and blurring them, that's a super common failure point. Your executive steering committee handles funding and the highest level escalations. On the flip side, your working groups handle domain-level day-to-day decisions. You never, and I mean never, take a localized how-to question up to the executive steering committee. And conversely, you can't set enterprise-wide policy in a local working group.
I really love this analogy from our source material. A data council is a town council for data. It's brilliant because it makes the concept stick. Just like a real-world town council, it sets local rules, it resolves disputes between neighbors, or different business domains in our case. It approves local changes and provides a highly visible forum for decisions. Without it, decisions just get made in the shadows, totally inconsistently.
All right, Part 3, Targeted Communication Strategies. So, now that we have a forum in place, how do we broadcast our decisions effectively? Now, what's really interesting here is the quantitative data from Durga Analytics on what actually drives adoption. Standing data councils drive 30% of adoption impact. Champions networks drive another 25%. Compare that to static wikis sitting at 15% or office hours at just 10%. Active, human-centered forms vastly, overwhelmingly outperform passive documents or one-off town halls when you're trying to actually change organizational behavior. And the secret here? One message absolutely does not fit all. We have to match the channel and the message directly to the audience. Executives, they need concise risk and value briefings. They just want the bottom line and the compliance posture. Stewards on the ground, they do not want board-level abstraction. They need practical, role-based, how-to guides. Targeting your communication ensures it actually lands, rather than just being immediately archived or ignored. Part 4, Building a Champions Network. Let's transition to the grassroots engines of adoption, the people on the ground making it happen. A champion is essentially an enthusiastic advocate embedded directly within a business area. The core philosophy here is incredibly simple. Peers persuade. Horizontal adoption beats vertical mandates every single time.
People inherently trust a colleague sitting right next to them who is already benefiting from a new process. They trust that way more than some mandate handed down from a central governance office.
Which brings us to Part 5, Sustaining the Community. Because even the best champions cannot operate in a vacuum indefinitely.
So the crucial point is this: to prevent data governance from being viewed as, just another one-time IT project that slowly fades into irrelevance, you must establish a community of practice. This is an ongoing, living network where stewards and champions share problems, swap solutions, and get recognized. Publicly recognizing good stewardship sustains long-term motivation far better than any strict policy ever could. It turns the whole program into a self-sustaining practice.
Finally, Part 6, Regional Communication Nuances. If you're operating a global enterprise, you already know this. Rollout is never a simple copy-paste job.
When we break it down across major regions, the cultural realities are drastically different. In the EU, your communication has to be formal, it's often multilingual, and you have to be highly considerate of works councils, which heavily shape training rollouts. It's a very compliance-heavy framing. Contrast that with the US, which is heavily story-led. Success stories, public recognition, and value framing are what drive engagement there. Then look at India, which thrives on a community-driven and mentorship culture. Leadership visibility and rapid enablement models work incredibly well there. You absolutely have to adapt your playbook to the region.
Okay, let's test your job readiness with a quick scenario straight from our practice. Imagine you're in an interview and they ask, how does community sustain governance after launch? Take a second to think about that. The strongest answer you can give is that a community of practice, that ongoing, active network of stewards and champions, is what turns a finite project into a living discipline. Without a community, adoption just fades the second the launch spotlight moves on. But with one, governance literally becomes part of the organizational DNA.
And that, everyone, is the machinery of change. That wraps up Module 1, Chapter 16. Up next in Chapter 17, we're going to explore the tooling landscape and selection criteria, because tools should support, not replace, all this human machinery we just built. But before you go, I want to leave you with a question to ponder for your own organization. Think about it. Are your data policies actually changing human behavior, or are they just gathering dust in a wiki graveyard that nobody reads? Give it some thought. I'll see you in the next explainer.
Welcome back to Durga Analytics Enterprise Data Governance Masterclass. I'm your host, and I'm bringing decades of in-the-trenches experience designing governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. Look, whether you're an aspiring data governance lead, a data architect, a privacy officer, or a data product manager, this explainer is designed exactly for you. We're going to give you practical, hands-on knowledge you can actually use in the real world. So let's quickly anchor ourselves in the broader journey of this massive 529-chapter course. We kick things off by building your foundational knowledge in Module 1, defined operating models and roles in Module 2, and lock down core disciplines like data quality and master data management all the way through Module 7. From there, we progress through crucial, heavy-hitting topics like privacy and compliance in Module 8, lineage and practice, and that leads us right into Module 11 on tooling and technology. This is precisely where today's explainer sits, perfectly aligning with Chapter 251 of our journey.
Just a quick heads up, this all builds toward the really advanced stuff in our later modules. Think data governance and cloud environments, responsible AI, full program implementation, and ultimately, getting you prepped for your final certification and our Functional Data Quality Masterclass. Every single step is grounded in vendor-neutral practice specifically for regulated enterprises.
Here's our agenda for today. 1. The governance workshop analogy. 2. Defining the tool categories. 3. Smart tool selection criteria. 4. Regional tooling considerations. And 5. Real-world scenario preparation.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the governance workshop analogy, grounding abstract concepts in tangible realities.
Okay, I want you to visualize enterprise governance tools just like physical tools in a craftsman's workshop.
You know, when you walk into a functional workshop, every single item has a very specific purpose, right? A data catalog is your labeled storage. It helps you find things quickly without digging through dusty boxes. Master Data Management, or MDM, well, that's the master template every single part is cut from. A data quality tool is the precise measuring gauge to ensure things fit together perfectly, and a policy engine, that's the safety guard keeping everyone secure. Think about it. You wouldn't just buy a safety guard without knowing what machine you're actually building. In the exact same way, you should only buy a governance tool for the specific job at hand.
Moving to Section 2, defining the tool categories, mapping the primary and supporting purposes of governance tools.
Every tool category out there, from catalogs to observability, has a distinct primary job alongside secondary supporting roles. The catalog is primarily for finding and understanding data. MDM's main job is establishing that single source of truth. Data quality measures your trust in the data, while the policy engine enforces the rules. Lineage traces data end-to-end, and observability actively monitors your pipeline's health. Now, modern platforms are definitely adding AI governance capabilities for model registries and active metadata, which is great. But the absolute key takeaway here is this: you must match the tool to your specific governance need, not to whatever vendor hype is currently dominating your LinkedIn feed.
Now let's break down a super common industry misconception. Professionals frequently confuse a data catalog with metadata management. But remember this absolutely crucial distinction. The catalog is your consumer-facing shopfront. It's the highly searchable, user-friendly interface for finding and trusting data. On the flip side, metadata management is the broader underlying discipline, the operational warehouse running behind the scenes, capturing the technical, business, and operational metadata that the catalog actually surfaces. They are intimately related for sure, but they are absolutely not identical. Honestly, confusing the two is the fastest way to blow $1 million software budget. Similarly, we see another really frequent mix-up between data lineage and data observability. Think of lineage as your historical map for audits and impact analysis. It traces exactly where data came from and where it goes. Observability, however, is more like an active heart monitor. It continuously watches pipeline health, checking freshness, volume, and schema, and it alerts you to silent data failures before they ever reach your consumers. So one traces the historical path, and the other checks the real-time pulse.
On to Section 3. Smart Tool Selection Criteria. How and when to procure the right technology.
I really want to hammer this point home because it's a trap so many organizations fall into. Only buy a tool to solve a problem you can already describe with evidence. Let me say that again. If you are a data governance lead and you're just browsing software features without a real evidence pain point, you aren't architecting a solution. You are just shopping.
So, when you're evaluating a tool, you've got to rigorously score it against these 5 criteria. First, fit to need. Does it actually solve that evidence problem we just talked about? Second, integration. Will it genuinely connect to your existing data stack? Third, adoption. Are your stewards and consumers actually going to use the thing? Fourth, total cost of ownership. This is a massive one. For my years running governance for global banks, I can tell you the sticker price is just the down payment. The real cost is the effort to integrate, run, and adopt it. And fifth, open versus commercial. You have to balance the lower license costs of open source against the much higher maintenance effort your engineering team will have to supply.
The absolute bottom line is this: a catalog needs stewards to curate it, and an MDM tool needs owners to govern those golden records. Tools amplify your operating model. They can never, ever replace the missing one. This reinforces what we covered earlier in the course. You figure out the roles and processes first, and only then do you sequence the tool adoption.
Let's look at Section 4, Regional Tooling Considerations, Understanding Global Realities in Procurement.
Context is everything when you're designing a global program. Take the European Union, for example. They prioritize being residency-aware. Tool data residency matters deeply for GDPR, and auditability features are highly prized for regulations like DORA and BCBS 239.
Conversely, the United States focuses on a best-of-breed approach, leaning hard into a rich commercial ecosystem, seamless cloud-native integration, and fast vendor innovation. Meanwhile, over in India, the primary focus is often on total cost and localization, which shapes choices heavily toward open-source growth and native cloud provider tools. Knowing your region dictates your entire tooling priority list.
Finally, Section 5, Real-World Scenario Preparation, applying this chapter to a regulated enterprise interview.
All right, let's put this into practice. Imagine you're interviewing at a massive integrated energy trading major. The interviewer throws this challenge at you. Leadership wants to buy a catalog to fix our data problems. What do you advise? As a governance expert, when leadership demands a magic software bullet to fix deep cultural or data issues, how do you successfully guide them without just coming across as a roadblock?
Here is how you nail that answer using our core principles. Step 1. You confidently advise them that a catalog only amplifies a working operating model. Without stewards to curate it, it's just going to become classic empty shelfware. Step 2. You establish that you absolutely must define roles and processes first, meaning identifying owners and stewards for the priority domains. And step 3. Only then do you choose a catalog that fits the stack, sequenced specifically to solve a named evidence discovery problem. It is never bought in hope.
So next time a vendor promises their shiny new tool will magically fix your enterprise data, ask yourself this: are we actually buying a solution to a proven problem, or are we just shopping for an operating model that doesn't exist? Having mastered how to select the right tools for your specific needs, we're perfectly positioned for Chapter 18. That's where we'll unpack the legal and regulatory drivers that shape literally everything we do. What actually happens when governance rules aren't just a nice-to-have, but a mandatory legal requirement? Join me next time to find out. Keep learning, keep governing, and I will see you in the next Explainer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our Enterprise Data Governance Explainer. I'm an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics, and with decades of experience designing programs across banking, energy trading, and asset management, I can tell you firsthand, regulation is the single strongest force behind governance. Today, we're diving into Module 01, Chapter 18, Legal and Regulatory Drivers. Let's get right into it.
Just to ground us in the big picture, real quick, remember we're currently in Module 01, Foundations of Enterprise Data Governance, which is part of our massive 21-module journey. We're building a sequenced path here from the absolute basics of why governance exists, straight through metadata, architecture, and eventually all the way to AI and certification. But right now, we really need to master the regulatory drivers that make all of that subsequent work totally mandatory.
Okay, here's our roadmap for this chapter. We're going to break down regulation types, map them globally, use a really practical, real-world analogy, look at how overlapping rules target one dataset, build an operational solution, and finally, do a regional posture comparison.
All right, starting off with Section 1, Regulation Types, Subjects versus Instrument Types. We need to begin by breaking down what we actually mean when we say data regulation, right? Because down in the trenches of enterprise data governance, it is absolutely not a single monolith. So, data rules basically come in broad categories based on their subject. First up, privacy rules. These protect an individual's personal data. Think GDPR. Second, we have prudential rules. These govern financial risk data, ensuring banks actually know their exposures, like BCBS 239. Third are resilience rules, such as DORA, which make sure your systems and data can withstand operational disruption. And finally, we're seeing newer rules emerging to govern models and AI, like the 2026 Model Risk Management Guidance and the EU AI Act. Now here is the real kicker. You've got to distinguish their instrument type. You literally cannot treat a binding law like GDPR or DORA the same way you treat a principles framework like BCBS 239 or non-binding supervisory guidance. Why? Well, a binding law means a breach results in a direct legal penalty. Bam, you're hit.
A supervisory principles framework, on the other hand, is applied through regulators rather than being directly enforceable as a statute. And supervisory guidance? It shapes expectations but doesn't create binding legal requirements itself. Mixing these all into one giant bucket labeled regulation is a super common but very real error for practitioners.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Global Regulatory Map, EU, US, and India. Let's look at how these regulations actually layer across different global jurisdictions for a regulated enterprise. This brilliantly illustrates the challenge we face. Just look at how the exact same data type faces differently named rules in the EU, the US, and India. Personal data. It's governed by GDPR in the EU, the CCPA as amended by the CPRA in the US, and the DPDP Act in India. Bank risk data faces BCBS 239 principles in the EU and US, but very specific RBI expectations in India. This proves exactly why global firms need a common governance core with regional overlays. You definitely don't want to build completely siloed systems for every single country. Which brings us to Section 3, the real-world analogy, traffic laws in 3 countries. To make this abstract jurisdictional overlap instantly tangible, let's use a highly practical analogy that I love using when teaching data stewards and compliance officers.
Picture this. You're driving the exact same car through 3 different countries. Driving that car means obeying 3 entirely different sets of traffic laws. You've got different speed limits, different sides of the road, different paperwork, and trust me, different speeding tickets. The car itself? It's identical. It hasn't changed one bit. But the rules differ by jurisdiction. Well, your data is that car. EU, US, and Indian regulations are the 3 distinct highway codes you absolutely must satisfy when your data crosses borders. Let's head into Section 4. One dataset, many regulators. Now, what's really fascinating here is how we apply this reality to a single asset in a highly complex environment, like an integrated energy trading firm or global investment bank. Notice the intersecting blocks here. Overlapping rules target the exact same data simultaneously depending on the region and the business function. The reality of your day-to-day work is that data does not sit neatly in one single regulationary box. It's like a giant overlapping puzzle.
Let's break this down step by step. A single client trading record acts as personal data governed by GDPR or DPDP. But at the exact same time, it's risk data under BCBS 239. It is also a reportable trade under MiFID II or Dodd-Frank. Oh, and it might feed a model governed by the 2026 MRM guidance. So, one single record is facing instruments of entirely different legal force, all at the exact same time. Wild, right?
This leads us directly into Section 5, the operational solution. Govern once, comply many. This overlap creates a major practitioner's dilemma. If one record has 5 different rules applying to it, how on earth do we avoid building a separate, duplicative governance effort for every single rule?
This brings us to the absolute golden rule of this explainer, and frankly, of your entire career as a data governance lead, data architect, or privacy officer. The mantra is simply this: govern once, comply many. The most efficient path is to govern the data well just once, build strong controls, ownership, quality, and lineage, and then map that single, beautifully governed dataset to each individual regulation's requirement. It's a total game changer.
But to operationalize that govern once, comply many mantra in the real world, you can't just rely on good intentions. You need a specific, hands-on artifact. We call this the obligations view.
An obligations view is the literal bridge between the legal world and the governance controls that actually satisfy it. It lists precisely which critical data sets you have, which rules apply to them, and what specific actions are mandated. Do you need to protect it, aggregate it accurately, report it, retain it, or trace it? This view is the foundational tool you're going to build upon when we reach the privacy and compliance modules later in the program. All right, moving to our final section, Section 6, Regional Posture Comparison, EU, US, and India Paradigms. Let's compare the distinct regulatory paradigms of our three major regions. Understanding the unique personality of each region's rulebook really helps you anticipate compliance needs.
First up, the European Union. The EU takes a comprehensive and incredibly strict approach. They rely on broad, prescriptive laws that can yield massive fines, like GDPR and DORA, and they grant strong individual rights. Plus, they're really leading the charge on AI with the EU AI Act, which imposes direct obligations on high-risk AI systems.
Conversely, the United States takes a sectoral and state-based approach. There's no single federal privacy law. Instead, state laws like California's CCPA, as amended by the CPRA, really lead the way. It leans heavily on enforcement and litigation-driven models, with specific sector laws for finance, like Dodd-Frank, and specific guidance for models.
Finally, India's regulatory posture is newer and actively consolidating. They're establishing modern privacy duties through the DPDP Act and its 2025 rules. But what's highly distinctive about India are its category-specific regulatory directions, particularly the RBI's really strict mandates regarding payment data localization.
As we wrap up this module, I want you to imagine you're sitting in an interview for a data governance lead role at a major regulated enterprise. The interviewer leans in and asks, what is the most efficient way to handle many overlapping regulations? I want you to remember this explainer and confidently answer, govern once, comply many. You explain that you build a common core of controls, apply regional overlays, and maintain a robust obligations view mapping datasets to their specific legal requirements. You'll absolutely nail it.
Understanding these regulatory drivers is exactly what transforms data governance from a nice-to-have administrative task into a mandatory enterprise-saving capability. Next up is Chapter 19, where we'll explore the security and privacy interplay with governance, the principles where these regulations really bite. But before you move on, I want you to ask yourself this. When the regulator knocks on your door tomorrow, will your data be an organized asset or a multi-million-dollar liability waiting to happen? Think about it, and I'll see you in the next chapter.
Welcome, practitioners, to this explainer. Let's get right into it. I'm your enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. I've spent decades standing up governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. And let me tell you, if there's one massive friction point I see over and over, it's exactly where governance, security, and privacy collide. So today, we're going to definitively clarify those boundaries so you know exactly how to orchestrate them.
Real quick, just a reminder of where we are on our roadmap. We're navigating a massive 21-module journey across 529 chapters. We're covering the whole shebang from building your foundational operating models all the way to cloud governance and responsible AI.
Here is our agenda for today. We'll cover the course focus, the 3 disciplines, a really helpful museum analogy, accountability, core principles, and global regulations. It's structured methodically to respect your time, so let's keep moving.
We are currently grounded in Module 01, Chapter 19, Security and Privacy Interplay with Governance, focusing specifically on the principles.
Okay, our first core concept. Practitioners constantly conflate these 3 disciplines. And honestly, it makes total sense because they act on the exact same data set. But we absolutely have to draw clear boundaries here. If we don't, you just end up with duplicated effort, turf wars, and eventually compliance failures. Looking at this matrix, you'll notice how the teal and amber boxes visually separate the responsibilities. It shows you exactly where governance leads, like in data classification, and where it merely contributes to security and privacy. Governance decides what the data actually means and who owns it. It provides the essential foundation that security and privacy ultimately act upon.
To resolve the confusion between these disciplines instantly, let's look at a powerful real-world analogy.
Think of a museum. Data governance? That's your curator. They are cataloging the artifacts and setting the handling rules. Security represents the guards protecting the building. And privacy? That's the set of rules dictating what can actually be photographed by the public. Without the curator cataloging everything, those guards are flying totally blind. They might end up guarding the cafeteria menus with the exact same intensity as the crown jewels.
Transitioning from theory to operations, we need to map out exactly who leads and who supports on the ground.
This brilliantly illustrates the shared responsibility RACI model. Using data retention as an example, governance doesn't outright own the legal rule. Legal is accountable for that. Records management sets the schedule, but governance operationalizes it. We embed that rule into stewardship so it actually happens in the real world rather than just living on a SharePoint site. And then the data owners apply it. We cannot operationalize these handoffs without core principles, and there's one specific concept that connects everything. That concept is data classification. This is the absolute linchpin. It means labeling data by its sensitivity so your protection is actually proportionate. If you get classification wrong, security and privacy are quite literally just guessing. Next up is data minimization. Look, this just means collecting and keeping only the data you actually need. It drastically reduces your risk profile. We don't want to hoard toxic data assets that are just going to increase our blast radius during a breach, right? Then we have privacy by design. This is a massive mindset shift. It means privacy isn't just bolted on as an afterthought right before a product launch. It has to be engineered into your systems and processes from day one. Finally, least privilege. This is granting a user only the bare minimum access needed to do their job. Governance actively supports this because you simply can't restrict access if you have no idea who owns the data or what the data even is. Let's see how these principles are not just optional niceties, but the exact bridge to operationalizing global laws. Notice how the interplay adapts across different regions. In the EU, the GDPR explicitly mandates privacy by design. Over in the US, it's a very security-forward environment. And looking at India, the DPDP Act introduces strict minimization, but treats privacy by design more as an aligned good practice. But regardless of the region, classification is always the universal enabler that drives compliance. Let's lock in this learning with an interview-ready application drawn directly from our enterprise scenarios. Imagine you're in a high-stakes interview for a governance lead at a strictly regulated bank, and they ask you this exact question. You can confidently look them in the eye and say, security cannot protect and privacy cannot minimize what governance has not first classified. Boom, you've completely nailed it. These principles are the bridge from abstract law to concrete daily practice. Mastering this turns compliance from a massive headache into a streamlined behavior. But I'll leave you with this to ponder. If your organization's data classification failed tomorrow, exactly how quickly would your security and privacy shields collapse? Definitely some food for thought. Next up is Chapter 20, Data Ethics and Responsible Data Use, where we go beyond what is simply legal to exploring what is actually right. I'll see you there.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's jump right into another essential session in our masterclass. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, I'm an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. I've spent literally decades designing governance programs across highly regulated spaces like banking, energy trading, and asset management. And today, we are continuing our sequence journey through the massive enterprise data governance course. We're talking about a comprehensive program that spans 21 modules and an incredible 529 chapters, taking us all the way from foundational models and metadata through privacy and AI, right up to cloud data mesh and certification. Today, we're zooming right into Module 1, Foundations of Enterprise Data Governance. And specifically, we are tackling Chapter 20, Data Ethics and Responsible Data Use in a Governance Context. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't just high-level theory. This is highly practical, job-ready material built with a strict regulated finance overlay.
Whether you're an aspiring data governance lead, a data architect, or a privacy officer, this builds directly on our previous chapter about privacy by design. We're going to tackle a really tough reality today. What exactly happens when simply following the law just isn't enough?
All right, let's dive into this. Here is your agenda to get enterprise ready. We've got 1, beyond compliance, 2, core principles, 3, governance controls, 4, global expectations, and 5, some interview practice.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Beyond Compliance. Getting a handle on this section is absolutely crucial. The absolute foundation here is understanding the fundamental difference between what is legal and what is ethical. So compliance basically answers the question, what is legal? But ethics answers the question, what is right? And trust me, that is a much, much higher bar. Think about a simple analogy. Imagine a shopkeeper who charges a highly exploitative but entirely legal price to desperate customers during an emergency. Now, technically, they haven't broken the law, but they've completely destroyed their customers' trust. Ethics is the difference between blindly following the letter of the law and actually embracing the spirit of doing right by people. In banking or asset management, a loss of trust doesn't just mean losing a customer. It means intense regulatory scrutiny and absolutely tanking your market share. Unethical but legal data use is a massive risk. Moving right along to Section 2, Core Principles. Let's translate this philosophy into action. We need to look at the principles that leading governance programs actually use every single day. Interestingly, data from Durga Analytics shows that avoiding harm and fairness consistently rank as the highest data ethics principles. They extend significantly beyond what the law strictly requires, like basic privacy by design. So let's walk through exactly what each of these core principles means in practice for your enterprise. First up, fairness. Data use must not unjustly disadvantage individuals or groups. Think about an automated mortgage lending model. It can be completely legal in its design, yet systematically deny loans to specific demographics simply because it was trained on historically biased data. Make no mistake, that is an ethical failure. Next is transparency. Simply put, people must know how their data is being used. Running opaque operations where customer data is just fed into some algorithmic black box for dynamic pricing or energy trading without their knowledge, that is an enormous reputational time bomb for any enterprise. Then we have accountability. Look, principles are just words on paper if no one is actually in charge. In a mature governance structure, accountability means a named data owner or steward specifically answers for the outcomes of data use. The machine doesn't take the blame, a human does. Building directly on accountability as avoiding harm. As we noted earlier, this is the most proactive principle of the bunch. It requires risk managers, stewards, and platform engineers to actively anticipate and prevent harm caused by model-driven decisions long before that model ever hits the live market.
Finally, explainability. If an automated system denies a customer a credit card, you must be able to explain exactly why. Just saying, well, the AI decided it, is not a defensible answer. This connects directly back to the AI readiness concepts we covered all the way back in Chapter 1.
Okay, Section 3, Governance Controls. It's time to pivot from philosophy to hard operational controls. These controls have to be built right into the data lifecycle. So how do we actually execute this? By implementing concrete steps. First, purpose limitation, meaning you're using data only for approved reasons. Second, prohibited use lists, explicitly ruling out toxic uses right up front. Third, bias assessments, stress testing your models for unfair outcomes. And fourth, human oversight, requiring an actual ethics sign-off before deployment and continuous monitoring afterward. You need to treat these just like you would a mandatory data quality check. And why are these specific controls so unbelievably urgent? Because the sharpest ethical risks appear where data drives automated decisions. A model trained on biased data
will systematically disadvantage a group, legally but unfairly. Ungoverned, unexamined data scales unfairness at machine speed. Opaque models make decisions no one can explain, which is exactly why fairness checks and explainability are absolutely mandatory governance controls. Let's transition to Section 4, Global Expectations. Ethical expectations are rising everywhere, for sure. But the regulatory landscapes across different regions really shape how these governance controls are prioritized. As a data governance lead, you have to navigate these regional nuances. In the European Union, a strong rights culture drives GDPR and emerging AI regulations, which forces a heavy emphasis on fairness and explainability. Now, in the United States, the approach is driven heavily by sector and reputation. Think aggressive fair lending and anti-discrimination rules, where reputational risk is really what pushes ethics adoption. Meanwhile, in India, dynamic frameworks like the DPDP are adding brand new fairness and consent duties as their digital economy continues to mature. All right, Section 5, Interview Practice. Let's do a rapid-fire scenario-based prep. I want you to treat this like a real interview for a lead data governance role. Let's see if you're job ready and can articulate these concepts under pressure. Here is your first scenario. You are interviewing at a global investment and corporate bank. The interviewer looks at you and asks, why should our governance program care about ethics and not just compliance? Take a second to think about how you'd frame your response based on what we've just covered. Okay, here is the winning answer. You'd say, because data use can be perfectly legal yet highly opaque or harmful, the reputational and human cost of unethical but legal use is entirely real. Compliance answers what is legal, ethics answers what is right, a much higher bar. Leading programs treat responsible use as a core control to protect the firm from reputational risks that the law simply doesn't cover. Nailed it. Let's try one more. This time, you are interviewing for a role at a large asset manager and investment platform. The question is, where are the sharpest ethical risks in data use? Think about where the damage happens fastest. The strong answer here zeroes right in on automation. You tell them, the sharpest risks live where data drives automated decisions. A model trained on biased data can systematically disadvantage a group. Opaque models make decisions no one can explain to the affected people. Ungoverned data scales unfairness at machine speed. That is exactly why our governance program requires mandatory explainability and fairness checks before any model goes into production. Let's lock in these takeaways for all you working professionals out there. Remember, data ethics asks what is right, which is a much higher bar than just legal compliance. Your core principles are fairness, transparency, accountability, avoiding harm, and explainability. Your absolute highest risk is in automated AI-driven decisions. And most importantly, ethics is not an afterthought. It is a built-in lifecycle control. And that wraps up Chapter 20. Next up is Chapter 21, which covers quick wins and pilot program design, where we turn all these principles into an early, visible success. But before you jump into that next explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. If your enterprise is scaling automated decisions at machine speed, but literally no one in your organization can actually explain how those decisions are made, who is really governing your data? You or the machine? Think about it. I'll see you in Chapter 21.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this Masterclass Explainer. I'm your enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. I've spent decades in the trenches designing and running data governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. My absolute passion is standing up operating models, metadata capabilities, privacy controls, and modern data platforms, and more importantly, empowering professionals exactly like you to do the exact same thing. So grab a coffee and get ready because today we're tackling a make-or-break phase of our enterprise data governance journey.
Now, just a quick refresher for those tracking our complete curriculum, we are on a massive sequence journey across 21 modules. In the early stages, we've already hammered out the foundations, right? We've covered governance roles, operating models, policies, metadata, data quality, master data, and architecture.
From there, we expanded right through the critical middle layers. That meant tackling the heavy hitters: privacy, catalogs and practice, data products, tooling, contracts, integrations, and of course, the cultural transformation and change management required to actually make all of this stick.
And rounding out our journey, we scale into cloud governance, metrics, responsible AI, implementation, case studies, templates, and finally, our functional data quality masterclass. And remember, every single step we take here is grounded in practical, vendor-neutral reality with a strict, regulated finance overlay.
But right now, I want to zoom all the way back to the foundation and ask you a really critical question. How do you actually prove a governance model works before you try to scale it? Because you can't just flip a switch, right? Well, that is the exact question we're answering today as we lock into Module 01, Chapter 21, Quick Wins and Pilot Program Design. You see, momentum in data governance is built on early, visible success. If you overpromise and underdeliver, your whole program is going to stall out.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The absolute best way to prove your governance approach works is through a pilot. Now, what do we mean by that? A pilot is a small, bounded first delivery. It's carefully designed to prove the governance approach is viable before you ever attempt to roll it out to the rest of the company. This is absolutely crucial for you data stewards, leads, and architects out there, because a pilot converts the skeptics using hard, undeniable evidence rather than just theoretical arguments. It's your very first profitable rail line, it's visible, it's valuable, and it serves as the perfect template for the rest of your enterprise.
Think about it like a television network. A network doesn't just commission a full 20-episode series completely blind, right? No way. They make a pilot episode first. The entire goal of that single pilot is to prove the concept works, capture an audience, and ultimately win the budget for the rest of the season. A governance pilot is exactly the same thing. It's a small, complete, highly visible proof of concept that earns the commission for your full data governance program. You get this pilot right, and funding the rest of your enterprise rollout becomes infinitely easier.
But here's the catch. A pilot is really only as good as the quick wins it delivers. We define a quick win as an early deliverable that is high impact, low effort, and highly visible. It is deliberately chosen for one reason: to build belief and momentum among your stakeholders. As a governance lead, you have to actively dodge pilots that are huge, invisible, or require input from way too many teams. If your pilot takes 6 months and relies on 4 different departments just to show a basic result, that is not a quick win. Skepticism is going to harden before you ever get to the finish line.
Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is how it makes decision-making incredibly clear. When we chart out impact against effort and visibility, we want to aim straight for those sweet spots, the teal zones. Standing up a basic data quality scorecard or fixing just one critical data feed, those sit perfectly in the teal zone. They are high impact, low effort, and super visible. On the flip side, trying to catalog massive, enterprise-wide data sets right out of the gate, that hits the amber zone. It's just too much heavy lifting to give you that fast, early win you need.
And that brings us to a core philosophy you really need to internalize. Visible beats big. Let me say that again. Visible beats big. A small win that everyone in the business can actually see and feel is infinitely better than some massive, ambitious, slow-moving win that nobody even notices. You have to optimize your pilot for visibility and speed, not scale. Its primary job is to build belief. A visible, quick success does that way better than an ambitious rollout bogged down in corporate red tape. Of course, a win only really counts if you measure it and communicate it, and that is where the before and after comes into play. You need to capture a clear comparison of the state of your data before the pilot and the state of your data after. Why? Because the evidence from your pilot literally becomes the business case for your next phase of funding. If you don't capture the hours of manual rework you just saved or the specific quality score you lifted, your sponsors simply won't understand the value of what you just accomplished. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how you translate those captured metrics into actual business value. Notice how each pilot pairs a hard data point with a really compelling narrative. If your pilot was fixing one critical feed, your metric might be errors reduced by 40%, 20 rework hours saved weekly. But the story you tell your executives is, we permanently removed a recurring business pain. If you stand up a quality scorecard, your metric is quality score baseline moved from 60 to 90. But the story is, we made trust visible and it's rising. Evidence plus narrative. That is the magic formula that gets your next phase funded. Now keep in mind, you also need to adapt your pilot choices based on where you're operating. Regional nuances matter. In the European Union, pilots are heavily compliance-linked. They usually target a strict regulatory pain point. For example, risk data quality is a classic EU pilot because the auditability of it makes the win highly visible to regulators. Over in the United States, however, value-linked pilots that enable advanced analytics tend to resonate a lot better. Business line wins build rapid sponsorship there because speed to insight is a story U.S. executives absolutely love. Meanwhile, in India, the context shifts heavily toward readiness and hypergrowth. DPDP readiness pilots, geared toward the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, are incredibly common right now. These localized data pilots prove capability quickly and suit an incredibly fast, highly visible growth pace. Understanding these regional differences ensures your pilot is actually solving the right problem for the right executive audience. Okay, let's move to the practical side and see how this builds your career toolkit. You all are aspiring and working data governance leads, architects, and compliance officers. You need to be ready to articulate these exact concepts in high-stakes environments. So, let's run through some rapid-fire, scenario-based interview questions, specifically grouped by firm types where governance isn't just nice to have, it's absolutely mandatory.
First scenario. You're sitting across the table at a global investment bank. They ask you, how do you design a governance pilot that actually builds momentum? Here's your strong answer. I pick a small, bounded first delivery that is high impact, low effort, and highly visible. I might appoint a clear owner for one critical domain or fix just one broken critical feed. Then I capture a before and after metric and tell that story to the sponsors. The pilot proves the approach with evidence, acting exactly like a TV pilot episode that wins the commission for the full series.
Next up, a regulated retail bank asks you, why optimize a pilot for visibility rather than scale? Your strong answer should be, because a pilot's fundamental job is to build belief and momentum. A big, ambitious pilot takes way too long and depends on way too many teams, which just causes skepticism to harden before it ever delivers. A visible, fast, quick win converts skeptics early with hard evidence. It earns the credibility we need to scale later. Remember, visible beats big.
All right, what about a large asset manager? They want to know, how does a pilot actually connect to funding the wider program? So the crucial point here is the self-funding sequence. You explain that a governed, high-value domain producing visible, measured value, like concrete hours of rework saved, justifies the next budget cycle. A program that front-loads cost but has no early win is going to struggle hard at its very first budget review. A pilot pays for attention and makes the entire program self-sustaining.
Finally, an enterprise closing question you might get at any large regulated firm. What makes a good governance quick win? Deliver this answer with total confidence. It must be high impact, low effort, and highly visible. It has to remove real pain or add clear value quickly without relying on a dozen different teams. Something like appointing an owner for a critical data domain. That fast, valuable, and visible win builds the exact belief the enterprise needs to scale.
To wrap this up, I want to leave you with a somewhat provocative thought. Without a measured quick win, how long do you think your governance budget will truly survive? The hard reality is not very long at all.
You have to prove value to earn the right to scale. But now that you've mastered the art of the pilot and the quick win, you have the funding foundation you need to keep moving forward. This positions us perfectly for our next step. So join me as we confidently transition to Chapter 22, where we'll tackle governance for cloud and multi-cloud environments, because that, ultimately, is where the data now lives. I'll see you there.
Welcome back, professionals, to our Enterprise Data Governance Masterclass. I'm your instructor, an enterprise data governance expert from Durga Analytics. Over the last couple of decades, I've had the privilege of standing up governance operating models across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, today we are tackling a massive paradigm shift. We're unpacking exactly what happens to your governance strategy the moment your data actually leaves the building.
Just as a quick reminder of where we are in our overall sequence journey, we are navigating a massive curriculum together. 21 modules, 529 chapters in total. We've already built a rock-solid foundation, moving from why governance even exists, straight through roles, policies, metadata, quality, master data, architecture, privacy, lineage, and data products.
And we're not stopping there. We're building all the way through tooling, integration, adoption, cloud and data mesh, metrics, responsible AI, right up to actual implementation in our Functional Data Quality Masterclass. The whole goal of this explainer series is to get you fully certified and job ready with a vendor-neutral, practical approach that works in the real world. Okay, let's zoom right into this specific step of the journey. We are now in Module 15, Chapter 351, which is all about governance for cloud and multi-cloud environments. Earlier in the course, we talked about cloud migration being a huge business driver, right? Well, today we're going to detail exactly what your governance program has to do once that data is actually sitting in the cloud. We're applying our core principles, but under completely new conditions. Here's our agenda for this explainer. 1. Owning versus renting warehouses. 2. 4 new cloud risks. 3. Residency versus localization versus sovereignty. 4. Adapting controls. 5. Regional pressures. And 6. Interview prep. Section 1. Owning versus renting data warehouses. Let's kick things off with a fantastic analogy that instantly demystifies this whole transition, especially for your non-technical stakeholders, like risk managers, privacy officers, or your business-side data owners. Think of on-premise data as owning a single warehouse. You hold all the keys, and you completely control the perimeter. The cloud, on the other hand, is like renting space in hundreds of warehouses all over the world. Sure, it's incredibly convenient, and the scale's unmatched, but your valuable goods are now sitting in buildings you literally don't own, in countries with completely different laws, and they're potentially accessible to vastly more people. Governance is simply how you keep track of what is where and who can reach it when you no longer hold every single key.
Moving on to Section 2. 4 new cloud governance risks.
Naturally, when you move your valuable enterprise assets from a model of owning to renting, you're going to introduce some brand new vulnerabilities that we as data stewards and architects have to systematically manage. What's really interesting here is that data sprawl and residency issues absolutely dominate these new concerns. In fact, they take up nearly half of all cloud governance efforts. These aren't just theoretical textbook problems, these are the day-to-day operational realities that are going to consume a lot of your team's time. So the crucial point here is that we are fighting 4 very specific new risks. First up is data sprawl. In the cloud, data is effortlessly copied across services, causing it to just proliferate and drift completely out of sight. Second is residency, where your data can easily land in a region that breaches your legal location rules. Third is the shared responsibility confusion, which we'll dig into in a second. And fourth is access at scale. Cloud permissions are just so powerful and complex that granting overbroad access by accident is remarkably easy to do.
I really want to emphatically warn you about the shared responsibility trap.
It is a massive source of cloud data incidents. A highly dangerous assumption is that the cloud provider handles your governance. Listen, they secure the infrastructure, they lock the physical building, but you, the customer, still completely owned classifying, controlling, and governing the data inside it. Assuming the vendor handles this for you is basically a fast track to exposing your company's sensitive data.
Which brings us to Section 3, defining residency, localization, and sovereignty.
We really need to carefully disentangle 3 critical compliance terms that professionals constantly mix up. If you work in a regulated space, you absolutely must know the difference here. Residency is simply the where. It's a physical location choice, usually made to improve performance. Localization is the must-stay-here legal requirement. For example, India's RBI mandating that payment data physically stays in country. Sovereignty, however, is the whose law applies consequence. It dictates that your data is subject to the laws of whatever jurisdiction it physically sits in. When you're managing multi-cloud governance, you have to reason about all 3 of these simultaneously.
Let's look at Section 4, adapting controls to the cloud.
So, knowing all these risks and tricky definitions, how do we practically adapt our governance controls without throwing away our core principles of ownership and quality? Well, first, you have to understand the environment. You have to govern the data plane, where your information actually flows and is processed, and the control plane, which is where your cloud resources are configured. Why both? Because misconfigurations in the control plane are actually a leading cause of massive data exposures, even if your data plane itself is perfectly secure.
So how do we build this into an automated strategy? Because in the cloud, manual checks are completely out. You literally can't keep up. The mechanisms have to become code. We shift from manual to automated policy-driven controls. Classification relies on resource tagging, so the ownership tags literally travel with the data. Access has to be governed by policy as code to handle the massive scale, and lineage must be captured automatically across all your services. The job is exactly the same, but your toolkit is entirely modernized.
Let's jump to Section 5, regional pressures and interview prep. It's vital to look at how these governance strategies shift depending on where you are in the world. If you're a data governance lead rolling this out globally, you're constantly balancing competing regional pressures. In the European Union, it is residency critical. You're dealing with strict GDPR transfer rules and DORA resilience expectations. Over in the United States, the focus is much more on mature, cloud-native tooling and heavy multi-cloud environments. And in India, it is heavily localization-driven, strongly shaped by the RBI's strict expectations around cloud and outsourcing.
Let's put this into practice with a global investment bank scenario. Imagine you're sitting in a high-stakes interview, and they ask you, how does moving to the cloud actually change enterprise data governance? What's your concise 90-second answer?
Your strong answer is that the cloud changes the conditions, not the core principles. In the cloud, data copies in seconds, and we no longer own the infrastructure. So we keep our ownership, quality, and classification principles totally intact, but we adapt our controls. We shift entirely to automated, policy-as-code mechanisms. We use resource tagging, automated lineage, and we enforce our residency rules directly through configuration.
Okay, what about a regulated retail bank scenario? Let's say a compliance officer asks you to explain the shared responsibility model, and they specifically want to know why it's considered such a dangerous trap.
You confidently explain that this is the model where the provider secures the underlying infrastructure, but the customer completely governs their own data. It's a trap because organizations wrongly assume the vendor is handling the governance too. They absolutely aren't. Assuming the provider is classifying and controlling access to your data is exactly how sensitive enterprise information ends up exposed on the front page of the news.
Finally, an integrated energy trading major scenario. If they ask you about multi-cloud specifically, say you're moving trading data across multiple different cloud providers, what new risks do you highlight for them?
You immediately call out data sprawl, because data drifts out of sight
fast. You highlight sovereignty risks, where data lands in a new jurisdiction and instantly becomes subject to local laws. You mention the very real risk of access at scale errors and control plane misconfigurations. But most importantly, for a multi-cloud setup, you highlight the monumental challenge of requiring consistent policy as code across entirely different cloud provider ecosystems that each operate completely differently.
As you can see, mastering cloud governance isn't just theory. It's an absolute operational necessity. But it does raise one final, very provocative thought. If we have to build all of these sophisticated, automated controls, how on earth do we actually pay for it all without breaking the business? Well, that brings us right to our next topic. Next up is Chapter 352, where we dive into cloud budgeting, FinOps, and the funding models you need to pay for all of this sustainably. I will see you there.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to This Explainer. I'm thrilled to be guiding you today. Drawing from my decades of experience designing and running data governance programs here at Durga Analytics, across regulated banking, energy trading, asset management, I can tell you firsthand that securing sustainable funding is literally the make or break moment for any program. Today, we're focusing on exactly that, budgeting and funding models for your governance initiatives. We're not just talking about scrounging up a one-off budget. We are talking about building a sustainable long-term financial engine. Let's get right into it. Real quick, here's our agenda. We'll start with a brief welcome, then dive into the 4 governance funding models. After that, I'm going to share the golden funding rule, map out the path to self-funding, and finally wrap up with some global nuances and rapid-fire interview prep. Section 1. Welcome to Chapter 23. Let's do a quick recap. As a quick reminder, our complete enterprise data governance course spans 21 modules and a whopping 529 chapters. We cover the whole shebang, from why governance exists and foundational operating models, all the way through metadata, quality, architecture, privacy, data mesh, and responsible AI. Each module is totally grounded in vendor-neutral practice, complete with a regulated finance overlay. Right now, we're wrapping up Module 1 with Chapter 23, which is absolutely essential knowledge for aspiring data governance leads, stewards, architects, and privacy officers. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the 4 governance funding models. To really wrap our heads around these models, we're going to use a brilliant and honestly super helpful analogy. I want you to think of funding governance like funding a shared road that absolutely everyone in your company uses. Every department is out there driving their data vehicles on this road. So how exactly do we pay for its upkeep? Well, first up is central funding. Think of this like paying for that shared road using general taxes. A corporate budget basically funds governance across the entire firm. Now, this is fantastic for early programs that desperately need stability just to get off the ground. But there's a catch. The risk here is that executives looking to cut costs can easily just label it as corporate overhead. Next is the chargeback model. This one's akin to setting up a toll booth for every user on our shared road. Business units pay strictly for the governance services they actually consume. Now, this works pretty well for mature, highly cost-conscious firms, but it comes with a massive, massive risk. If business units decide they just don't want to pay the toll, they can opt out. And if they do that, your shared governance infrastructure literally starves from underfunding. Third, we've got project-embedded funding. Imagine bundling the cost of maintaining the road directly into the budget of each individual delivery van. Governance costs just sort of ride inside individual project budgets. You see this a lot in highly project-driven organizations. But the fatal flaw here? The exact second those projects get cut or delayed, your governance funding gets dropped instantly. Poof, gone. Finally, we have hybrid funding. Think of this as a base tax to actually build the road, plus tolls for the really heavy users. You have a central core budget, and that gets supplemented by business unit contributions. Because the road benefits everyone, relying on pure per-use tolls will always underfund it. Having a base budget plus a contribution model prevents this starvation, and honestly, it's usually the most sustainable fit for large enterprises. If you take a look at this suitability score charts, the hybrid model clearly pulls ahead, hitting a solid 85 out of 100. Central funding is a decent backup at 70, but chargeback and embedded, they lag far behind just because of those inherent risks we talked about. Hybrid is, without a doubt, the most sustainable choice for large firms.
All right, Section 3, the golden funding rule.
If you only take one thing away from this entire explainer, make it this non-negotiable principle. Whatever the model, fund the central core from a stable budget. That means your governance lead, your core standards, your shared tooling, they all must be protected. If your core depends on volatile project money or chargeback funds, it will absolutely disappear in the very first economic downturn, and your entire program collapses right along with it. You have to protect the core at all costs.
Let's transition to Section 4, the path to self-funding. We want to stop looking at governance as just a cost center, right?
Look closely at this payback curve. In years 1 and 2, yeah, you need investment. But as you hit year 3 and year 4, the cumulative net funding position shifts completely. The value your program delivers, things like avoided rework, way faster reporting, and completely averted regulatory fines, eventually crosses and then exceeds the initial cost. At this point, the program is essentially funded from the savings it creates. And let me tell you, this is your absolute strongest defense at budget time. A program that pays for itself is practically impossible for them to cut. For our final segment, Section 5, Global Nuances and Interview Prep. So you really have to adapt your pitch depending on where you operate in the world. Notice how the European Union heavily leans on compliance. Regulatory necessity and fine avoidance are what secures stable funding there. Over in the United States, it's value justified, focusing heavily on ROI framing and business value. Meanwhile, in India, cost efficiency and DPDP readiness are what's shaping the emerging hybrid models. The takeaway? Know your audience and tailor your pitch. Let's run through some rapid-fire scenario questions to prep you for the real world. Let's say you're at an interview at a global investment bank. They ask you, what funding models exist for a governance program and which do you favor? A strong executive-level answer lists all 4 right off the bat: central, chargeback, embedded, and hybrid. You confidently state that you favor hybrid for most large firms because it perfectly balances stability with business contribution. But immediately, and this is the kicker, you emphasize the golden rule. You tell them you will absolutely fund the central core from a stable budget to avoid volatile project money wiping out the program during a downturn. Boom, nailed it. Next scenario, you are interviewing at a highly regulated retail bank, and they hit you with, what is the risk of funding governance purely through chargeback? Your answer here should immediately pivot to our shared road analogy. The major risk is underfunding through opt-out. Because governance is a shared benefit, if units only pay per use, some will inevitably opt out just to save a quick buck. And when that happens, the essential shared capability starves. You tell them that pure per-use tools systematically underfund shared infrastructure, which is exactly why a stable central core is required. Third scenario, an asset manager wants to know the bottom line. They ask, how does a governance program actually become self-funding? You explain that it happens the moment the value delivered exceeds the cost. You point out that avoided rework, much faster regulatory reporting, and averted fines accumulate over time. Eventually, just like we saw on that payback curve, this crosses the investment line. Make sure you highlight that achieving this self-funding state becomes your ultimate bulletproof defense at budget time against any proposed cuts. Finally, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. And honestly, it's a question that applies to any large enterprise role you'll ever take on. Why does the choice of funding model matter beyond just the actual money? It's because the model completely shapes your program's politics, its resilience, and its ultimate survival. A brilliantly designed, well-funded governance program that relies on fragile, volatile money will still fail the second the winds change.
choosing a sustainable model is just as critical as the dollar amount itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Join me next time in Chapter 24 as we look beyond our own walls and dive into vendor management and third-party governance. See you then!
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I'm your host, and as an enterprise data governance expert here at Durga Analytics, I've spent decades in the trenches designing and running governance programs across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset management enterprises. We've stood up everything from operating models to privacy controls and modern data platforms. And today, we're tackling a massive, unavoidable reality in modern business. Your data rarely stays inside your own four walls. Vendors, SaaS providers, partners, they're all processing it too. And the hard truth? Their failures become your failures. So let's roll up our sleeves and master how to handle external data risks.
Just to briefly anchor us in the broader journey, remember that our Enterprise Data Governance course spans a massive 21 modules. We're covering the whole shebang, from our current foundations right through operating models, strategy, metadata, quality, MDM, architecture, privacy, catalogs, data products, tooling, contracts, integration, adoption, cloud governance, metrics, responsible AI, implementation, case studies, templates, all the way to a full data quality masterclass. It's a complete sequenced journey grounded in vendor-neutral, regulated finance practices. Right now, we're at the very tail end of Module 1, diving specifically into Chapter 24. All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll hit the third-party problem. Second, the hidden subprocessor dangers. Third, governing the vendor lifecycle. Fourth, regional governance expectations. And finally, interview prep and next steps. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the third-party problem. We've got to start by acknowledging an uncomfortable reality. Data is incredibly fluid, which means your governance program literally has to extend far beyond your direct span of control. If you take only one thing away from this entire explainer today, make it this. You can outsource the processing of your data, but not the accountability for it. This is an absolutely crucial tenet of data governance. When a vendor or a SaaS tool processes your data, their handling reflects 100% on you. In the eyes of regulators and your customers, a breach at your vendor is your breach, period. To put this into perspective, think of it like lending out your car. It's a brilliant analogy. If you toss your keys to a friend and they crash it, or they park it in front of a fire hydrant, guess who still owns the consequences? You do. The fines, the insurance hit, the damage, it all comes straight back to you. Now, you wouldn't lend your car to someone without knowing they actually have a valid license and a decent driving record, right? Well, third-party governance is that exact same background check, applied to everyone you trust with your company's data. Which brings us to Section 2, hidden subprocessor dangers. As we move down the supply chain, the risks really start to magnify. We have to look at the blind spots. And to do that, you need to understand how the law views these relationships. Honestly, it's time to drop the blurry generic word vendor from your vocabulary. The precise role determines the legal duties. Under Europe's GDPR, the controller decides why and how data is processed. That's usually you. The processor acts on your instructions. And a sub-processor is a processor hired by your processor. Over in India, the DPDP Act uses data fiduciary for the controller equivalent. And in the US, state laws like the CCPA use business and service provider. Pinning down the exact terminology is step 1 in enforcing accountability. But here's the catch. You absolutely cannot stop at your direct vendor. And this introduces us to fourth-party risk. What happens when your vendor's vendor subcontracts? Your data can easily flow 3, 4, or even 5 layers deep into environments you have never personally assessed. That's fourth-party risk. The danger here is profound because it's completely invisible if you aren't actively looking for it. You have to demand visibility into the entire chain and hold your direct vendor contractually accountable for every single downstream player. Take a look at the deep red zones clustering on this Durga Analytics risk heat map. See where the heat is?
Subprocessors and offshore operations carry the absolute highest layered privacy, security, and compliance risks. When you have offshore data sharing mixed with hidden SaaS sublayers, that is exactly where firms lose visibility. And for sure, that is exactly where regulatory breaches most commonly happen. So, how do we actually fix this? Let's get into Section 3, Governing the Vendor Lifecycle. We're moving from theory to hands-on program management now. Managing third-party risk isn't a one-and-done thing. It runs sequentially through a 4-part blueprint. Step 1 is selection. You've got to do your due diligence on their controls before you ever sign them on, weeding out the risky ones early. Step 2 is contracting. This is where you bake in your data protection and audit clauses, making your requirements legally binding. Step 3 is operation. This means continuous monitoring and actually exercising those audit rights. And finally, Step 4 is exit. When a contract ends, you have to ensure complete data return or destruction so there's no lingering exposure. The big takeaway here, contracts make your requirements enforceable, but it's your controls and audits that actually verify them. Moving right along to Section 4, Regional Governance Expectations. We covered some of this back in Chapter 18, but it's vital to remember that depending on where your data lives, the rules change drastically. In the EU under GDPR, processor obligations are incredibly strict. You legally need sub-processor transparency, and frameworks like DORA add massive tech risk rules. Over in the US, vendor risk is managed a bit differently, mostly through contractual and sectoral rules where breach liability drives the diligence. Then you look at India, and you're dealing with strict RBI outsourcing guidelines and localization rules that heavily restrict offshore processing. Your governance program has to be agile enough to adapt to these regional nuances. All right, let's land the plane with Section 5, Interview Prep and Next Steps. Because we're all practitioners here, you need to be able to articulate these concepts under pressure. Imagine you're interviewing for a data governance lead role at a major regulated bank, and they hit you with this. What is a subprocessor and why is it dangerous? Well, a rock-solid expert answer goes like this. A subprocessor is essentially your vendor's vendor, a third party engaged deeper down the chain. It's incredibly dangerous because data can flow multiple layers deep into completely unassessed, invisible places, which elevates your privacy and security risks. To manage it, you demand strict transparency and hold your direct vendor contractually liable for their entire downstream chain, ensuring no unassessed hands ever touch the bank's data. I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. If regulators walked into your firm today, would your current vendor contracts actually protect you? Or do you have unseen fourth parties handling your most sensitive data right now? Really think about that. Because outsourcing the processing does not outsource the accountability. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 24. Join us in the next explainer for Chapter 25, which is our massive Module 1 capstone. We are going to tie everything we've learned together and build a real, executive-ready data governance charter. You definitely don't want to miss it. See you there.
Welcome to this explainer. Drawing on my decades of experience standing up operating models over at Durga Analytics, working across regulated banking, energy trading, and asset manager, I'm going to walk you through the ultimate capstone of our first module today. If you're an aspiring or working data governance lead, a data steward, an architect, or maybe a privacy officer, you already know a really hard truth. Great ideas mean absolutely nothing without formal authority. So today, we're building exactly that, the executive-ready data governance charter.
Okay, let's quickly glance at our masterclass agenda. We've got 6 parts today. 1. Looking at the 21-module journey. 2. Defining the charter. 3. The assembly of the 6 core sections. 4. Meeting the executive standard. 5. Global anchors. And finally, 6. Defending the mandate. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The 21-module journey. Where we are.
So, just as a quick reminder, this enterprise data governance course is a massive, sequenced journey spanning 21 modules and 529 chapters.
We go from the absolute foundations of why governance even exists, straight through roles, operating models, policies, metadata, and data quality. We tackle master data, architecture, privacy, and lineage before getting into the really cool stuff like data products, tooling, APIs, and pipelines. Then we master the human element with change management, scale up into cloud and data mesh, build out our metrics, and dive into responsible AI. Finally, we wrap up with implementation, case studies, templates, and a functional data quality masterclass. The whole thing is grounded in vendor-neutral practice with a regulated finance overlay, giving you actual job-ready artifacts. And right now, well, we are at the climax of Module 1, Chapter 25. This is our capstone. We're going to take every single concept you've learned so far, the business case, the scope, roles, operating model, life cycle, metrics, roadmap, funding, the whole shebang, and we're snapping them together into one single executive-ready deliverable.
Which brings us to Section 2, defining the charter, the founding mandate.
So, what exactly is a data governance charter? Well, it's your founding document. It's a concise, executive-ready statement of exactly why your program exists, what it covers, who is accountable, how it actually works, and how it's funded. But here's the kicker. Most importantly, it is the physical artifact a sponsor signs to officially authorize your program. Without that signature, it's literally just a piece of paper.
Think about it this way. You wouldn't try to run a country without a constitution, right? You need something dictating the powers, the offices, and the laws. It's the exact same thing here. You absolutely cannot run a governance program without a charter. Without it, you have zero source of authority. You're just a person with some really good ideas asking people nicely to please clean up their data. The charter is what turns those good ideas into a real, enforceable mandate.
All right, Section 3, Assembly, the 6 sections.
This brilliantly illustrates the structural blocks of our charter. On one side, you see the 6 required sections, but I want you to pay close attention to that final amber gate at the end. Just writing the sections only gives you a draft. It's that sponsor sign-off, that final gate that transforms this document into a powerful operational mandate.
Let's look at how this builds across those 6 sections. First, you've got purpose and scope, why we exist and what we cover. Second, roles and RACI, and we're naming specific people here, not just vague departments. Third is the operating model. Are you centralized, federated, or hybrid? Fourth, policies and standards. Fifth, metrics and KPIs to actually measure your success. And sixth, roadmap and funding. Crucially, within all this, you have got to establish clear decision rights and a formal path for escalations. Because trust me, without a defined path for exceptions, rules are just going to get bent informally and inconsistently across the business. When I teach data stewards and platform engineers, I love showing them this worked skeleton for a back. Just look at how beautifully complex realities can map onto a single, coherent page. The purpose leads right out of the gate with governing counterparty risk to cut reporting risk. The roles name specific domain owners. The operating model is hybrid. The metrics? They target 90% of critical data owned in 12 months. And the roadmap outlines a realistic 3-year path to self-funding. Every single row takes a Module 1 concept and integrates it into a highly signable section.
Moving on to Section 4, the executive standard, quality control.
Okay, before you ever put this in front of an executive, you must brutally apply what we call the sign-off test. I want you to put yourself in your sponsor's shoes for a second. Could they read each section and know exactly what they are approving? Who is accountable, and how success will be judged? If any section is vague, if people are unnamed, or goals are unmeasurable, you have to fix it before the meeting, not after a rejection.
You've got to hold yourself strictly to the executive standard. Listen, executives do not want to read essays. They want short, tight, punchy paragraphs. Do not list vague functions, name real, accountable people. State measurable success with explicit dates, and show exactly how your phased plan is being funded. If you walk in with vague language or fuzzy goals, I guarantee your charter will be sent right back down to you.
Section 5. Global Anchors. Adapting across regions.
This is a real game changer. This breakdown shows how you have to anchor your purpose depending on exactly where in the world you operate. If you're in the European Union, your charter is compliance anchored. You're leading with GDPR and DORA obligations, putting a huge emphasis on auditability and named accountability. Now, if you're in the US, it's value anchored. You lead with analytics value, risk reduction, business line ownership, and you make that self-funding argument front and center. Operating in India, it's readiness anchored. You're leading with DPDP readiness, growth enablement, and reflecting data localization directly in your scope. You literally have to speak the language of the specific regulatory environment that your sponsor cares about the most.
And finally, Section 6. Defending the mandate, the pitch.
When you're in the room defending your charter to a skeptical sponsor, treat it as a true sponsorship moment. Lead with a business case in their language, which is usually value and risk. Prove your scope is disciplined. Show them you aren't trying to boil the ocean here. Present measurable, dated success. And most importantly, anticipate their questions. What does it cost? How long will it take? Who is accountable? You need to anticipate these so well that the charter already answers them on the page. A well-built charter defends itself, guys. If every reasonable question is answered in black and white, the sign-off naturally follows.
And there you have it. When you get that signature, you have officially turned abstract concepts into a living, breathing program. You've built your founding artifact, and you have officially completed Module 1. But I want you to ask yourself something. How will your freshly minted, homegrown mandate hold up when it collides with entrenched company culture and major industry heavyweights? Next up is Module 2, Data Governance Frameworks and Standards, where we're going to see exactly what happens when your charter goes toe-to-toe with DAMA and DBOK and DCAM. See you in the next chapter.